For context, my grandparents got this big suburban house in the 80s for a really low price and decided to build a pool on the second floor to it and whatnot. When I say the house was big, I mean it was big. A large basement with wine cellar, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, an office, 2 living rooms, huge kitchen/dining room and a pool house/bar on the first floor. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a balcony terrace, and a living/dining room on the second floor. My family moved in when the construction was still going on, and weird-ass things started to happen. Like a drill going max power being unplugged, or things disappearing and appearing again in strange and odd places. But my family would always joke about the house being haunted, and never really did anything about it. At some point, it got pretty insane, and my grandpa took a bottle of holy water, and that was it. Ever since I remember, I've had this strange, uneasy feeling about the house, and particularly about some rooms within it, like I was never alone and was being watched. But I always brushed it off, thinking that I was just being a silly girl. At some point, I got to completely avoid going into these places. I was maybe 3 or 4 when I had this dream. I was playing at the bottom of the stairs and some shadowy figure started growing from the floor. I remember I was just watching it slowly materialize itself in front of me, until it looked like a man with a hat and evil eyes, all black. A few years ago, researching over the web, I realized it was a shadow man. He had his hands stretched over towards me and was about to say something when I woke up, shaken and scared to death. I sometimes saw this figure standing on the hallway, so I avoided going there by myself as much as I could. When I was 7, I moved to the room besides the stairs on the second floor. This is one of the rooms that made me feel uneasy. I would always find my stuff misplaced around my room, and my lamps and radio unplugged, but I didn't really pay attention to it. Staying in this room, my nightmares and creepy dreams intensified. I remember clearly waking up starving pretty early on a Sunday morning, and when I tried to get up, I fell into a void and woke up really scared. When I finally stopped shaking, I tried to get up again just to end up going into the void once more. This went on 5 times, and I was so scared that I eventually stopped trying to get up until my mum went to wake me up a few hours later. Another time, I was sitting in the kitchen with my grandma late one night. Everyone else was asleep, and we were chatting about life when she sewed some pillows for the sofa. When she was done, she piled the pillows over a counter where there were 4 of them, and made some tea for us to keep talking. We were laughing and everything, when all of a sudden the pillows flew across the kitchen, as if they were angrily tossed and crushed at the laundry room door, which was above the basement, another room that freaked me out. When I was 11 years old, and it was about 11 p.m. on a school night, I turned off all the lights and went to bed. Just a few minutes passed, so there wasn't a real chance that I was dreaming when I heard a rhythmic tapping on my window. It was soft at first and then a bit louder. Keep in mind, this was upstairs. I slowly turned around to the window, and through the curtains I saw this rather tall and lean humanoid figure with a long, thin head and a 3-fingered hand tapping on my window. I screamed at the top of my lungs and ran to my mum's bedroom. I remember she checked my room and everything was normal, so my grandpa and uncle checked the whole yard and found nothing. I obviously didn't sleep that night and stayed in my mum's room for at least a week. After that episode, I switched bedrooms. My new room had a walk-in closet where my grandma kept the towels, sheets, and some really old stuff that we never used, so its door was mainly closed. The door had a latch on the outside that was impossible to open from the inside of the closet. One afternoon when I was about 14, I was heading home alone, playing video games after school when I heard this loud bang coming from the closet. I immediately froze and looked at the door. Then it started to sound as if someone was desperately trying to take down the door, so I noped my way downstairs and waited for my mum. One afternoon when I was 15, I came back from school starving, as only a teen would, so I went directly to the kitchen. As far as I knew, I was alone. When I was almost done fixing myself a sandwich, I hear a loud bang upstairs and almost immediately heard my mum scream in absolute terror. So I obviously ran upstairs to check on her. We caught each other on the stairs. She was pale as ever and shaking, so I took her down to calm her down. As soon as she could speak to me again, she said she was watching TV in her room when she heard the same noise I heard. She startled and looked at the window and saw the shadow man floating outside her window, hence her scream and the running downstairs. We ended up leaving that house about 17 years ago. I still remember a couple nightmares I had back then regarding the house, and even now sometimes in my dreams, I still feel that house, and those feelings return. It creeps me out. My boyfriend at the time was driving me home in the dark. I lived in a really rural area, tons of farms and open fields with winding roads. You didn't pass other cars very often, especially this late at night. As we were driving, we saw this lady in white far ahead of us on a straight stretch of road. I know we both saw it, because my boyfriend commented how weird it was she was out so late. I told him that some people just go walking at night, which was true, and she probably lived around there, since it was so rural. Night walkers weren't an uncommon thing, since the only thing you had to worry about was the wildlife. We got closer, and I saw the woman was facing us. Her hair was pretty light-colored too, so it was hard to really make her out in the headlights because she was so pale and the lights just reflected off her. She wasn't moving, just facing us as we drove by. And then, right as we were about to pass her, she stepped in front of the car. My boyfriend slammed on the brakes. I flew hard, nearly hitting my head on the dash, and for about 5 seconds we were both silent from shock. I was pretty sure we had just hit someone, and being only 15 at the time, that was a hard thing to wrap my head around. But I still got out the car to check on the woman. You can probably guess the next thing that happened. We get out the car and find a huge dent on the hood of the car, but no sign of the woman. In fact, there wasn't any sign of anything at all. There was no blood, and we couldn't hear anything around us besides crickets. Everything was just as solemn as it normally was around the area. We looked around for the woman in a nearby bush and everything, but never found a thing. Like I said, there weren't any houses near enough for her to have run to. There weren't any places she could have really hidden, and it was like she was never there, except for the huge dent in my boyfriend's car. We drove in silence the rest of the way home. I'm not really a big ghost or paranormal person, but this really hit me hard. I told my mum what happened, and she asked all of our neighbors if they knew something. But most of them were elderly retirees and didn't know any younger women moving in the area. A few creepy details could be that around the next corner was the old cemetery, where some early settlers were laid to rest, and some girl had died a few years back from being hit by a car when the driver fell asleep not too far from that area. But you can do with that what you will. It's such a classic horror tale, no one believes me. But I know it happened because Jesus Christ, that dent cost my boyfriend a pretty penny to fix, and he was not a happy camper for the rest of the week. I was about 7 years old, my brother about 10. It was well past our bedtime when our mum woke up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked construction out of town back then, so it was often just us three at the house for weeks at a time. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left put you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left down that hallway led to my brother's room. The opposite end was my room, which was also across the hall from our upstairs bathroom. At either end of the hallway are windowed doors we always kept locked and rarely used. The door on my end led to a balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened to our back porch. The house kind of leans into a small hill. My brother and Mum had a bad habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I only knew this because I was always a light sleeper, and they just couldn't help flushing with the door wide open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. "I'm gonna try to pee before I go to bed. The past few nights I've been too afraid to walk to the bathroom. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway." I don't know if my mum wrote off as my brother telling ghost stories to try and scare me, or if she was already half asleep and didn't catch it, but she didn't react at all to my brother's confession. I, on the other hand, was terrified of it, for fear of seeing a ghost at the other end of the hallway or through the window is the reason I started running from the stairs to my bedroom at night. Years later, when I was 18, my mum and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog we had for a very short time when I was little. We were sharing stories about Max's tendencies towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviors when my mum blurted out, "Don't you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that bag of dog food we had?" This really caught me by surprise, because in all the years I lived in that house we never once called the cops. Gun-owner family in a quiet rural neighborhood. I asked her what she was talking about, and she looked equally surprised as if she had just revealed something by accident. "Oh, that's right. I never told you because you were too young at the time. Well, one night I woke up hearing noises outside my window, and when I looked I saw a man standing in my bedroom." She went on to describe how turning on the lights caused him to take off running, and how she grabbed my dad's pistol before calling the cops. I can't remember all the details I gave them when they showed up. Tall white male wearing a striped shirt and jeans, short dark hair, something like that. They said it matched the description of a man they were looking for in the area. Turns out he'd escaped from jail on a murder charge. Now I know it sounds so obvious hearing these two stories back to back, but it wasn't until a few years ago in my mid-20s that I pieced together that my brother had unknowingly warned us about a murderer who spent multiple nights casing our home. I started my first job at Tim Hortons when I was 16, and worked there for many years through high school and university. I could probably add about 10 stories here about inappropriate regulars, but this is the one that really haunts me. I was about 17 to 18 at the time, and worked at a local that was only about 10 minutes down the street from my parents' home. A neighbor called Alex lived roughly 8 houses down, and started coming in regularly for coffee and small talk with me. Alex was at least 45 to 50, and it turns out he used to work with my dad and had lived in my neighborhood for years. Nothing about our conversations seemed weird or alarming to me. After a few months of completely normal interactions, he found me on Facebook. I accepted, because I was young and had no social media boundaries at the time. This is when things started to get weird. He would DM me about things I was posting instead of commenting publicly. He would offer me rides to work or class, and would make comments about my hair, makeup, and curves. I found out he was married and has a son a few years younger than me. I started ignoring his messages and eventually removed him as a friend. When he came in for his coffees after this, he would ask for my number, wouldn't take no for an answer, and just generally made me feel uncomfortable. I started asking coworkers to serve him, and my manager at the time refused to ban him from the store. I also learned that he used to send a past employee flowers and do the same thing to her. Fast forward a few months. Alex seemed to have gotten the hint and stopped asking for me when he came into my workplace. One evening I was walking my dog around the subdivision and smoking some weed, as I did most nights before bed, and I walked the same route each night, which unfortunately meant I had to pass by his home. On my way back this night, I saw him out of the corner of my eye coming out of his house with a baseball bat. He stood in his front yard for a few minutes, and then I could hear him start walk behind me, and I panicked. I was also high and unsure if I should be alarmed. Was this a time to panic? Some kids in the duplex across the street started banging on the window and making a bunch of noise. I was too scared to even look up at them. My dog started getting agitated, and I decided to start running since I was only 2 minutes from home, and figured I could make it inside and lock the door. Alex must have been spooked by the noise and stopped following me. I'm very thankful for those kids who knew that situation did not look right and tried to warn me. It worries me to think about what could have happened if they hadn't. Alex, let's not meet. Ever. Back in my early 20s, I moved to Melbourne to go to university. Because of some of my dodgy mates I knew from outside of my uni, I somehow wound up as a go-to guy for drugs with my classmates. I hated the reputation, but maybe felt a little bit cooler at the same time. Ecstasy and speed mostly. I was at the bottom of the drug dealer food chain, the type of idiot who jacks the price up $10 a pill so he can make enough to drink and party. I had no guilt ripping these people off. They were mostly rich kids who lived with their parents and didn't have a job to support them through uni. Dealing them drugs was so easy and non-threatening. A few years after I finished uni, I was working an office job that was boring and paid peanuts. By now, my friends and I had pretty much grown out of the desire to take drugs on weekends. Dinner parties with good friends, good wine, and good conversation was more of our idea of fun. My drug dealing days had well and truly finished, or so I thought. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night. I just got home from a draining day at work and was exhausted and in a bad mood. I plonked myself on the couch and stared at the ceiling, trying to muster up the energy to get up and shower before bed. My phone starts flashing and vibrating on the coffee table next to me. I looked at the caller ID, and it was T-Bone, the nickname I had for a guy who I met at a festival years ago, and ended up spending a bit of time with here and there. He was a huge, friendly, weed-smoking, acid-tripping hipster with an impressive beard. I hadn't spoken to this guy in well over a year, so when I saw his caller ID on my phone, I immediately thought, he needs drugs. I answered and we exchanged some pleasantries, and then I could hear the tone of his voice changing to that awkward, "Hey, could I ask you a favor?" tone. He wanted drugs, and lots of them, $2,000 worth to be precise. When I asked him what specifically he wanted, he just said as many eckies and bags of speed as that can get. This was way outside my comfort zone. Even when I was dealing back in uni, 10 pills was usually the maximum I would offer at any one time. It was late, I was tired, but I was also broke, and figured that I could clear an easy $500 after purchasing from one of my guys I used to buy from. Something which T-Bone didn't need to know. I told T-Bone that I would call him back and see what I could do. To my surprise, the first person I called was Stover. He would be able to help me out, and he was only a 5-minute drive away. We discussed the terms and conditions which seemed reasonable. 60 E's and 3 grams of speed for $1,500. I called T-Bone, and he was happy to part with his $2,000 for this amount. I met Stover out of his luxurious apartment building. We had a quick chat, and he joked about wanting to meet the guy I'm selling to. We shook hands, and I was on my way to T-Bone. I asked T-Bone where he wanted to meet, and he told me where he was. I Google mapped the address, and it was a 45-minute drive from me. Had I known he was this far, I wouldn't have agreed to sell him anything, but I couldn't back out now. The address he gave me was in what is probably the worst neighborhood in Australia, known for its violent crimes, murder, and of course drug dealing. Irony. For anyone hearing this outside of Australia, they certainly don't know this run-down little hellhole in the tourist brochures. I also won't mention the name of the place because I don't wish to offend anyone who might happen to live there. I started the journey. I now had plenty of time to think about how stupid I am. I had a ridiculously illegal amount of drugs on me, driving out to the roughest neighborhoods in the country. After ages of sitting on the freeway, I took the exit and was approaching my destination. At this point I was so tired that I was in almost a dreamlike state. Every set of lights I pulled up to, people in cars next to me would give me greasy looks, trying to act hard and start confrontations. I pulled into the street where the house was. My phone chimed the familiar, "Your destination is on the left." Thanks, phone. The street was so dark because the street lights were out, and there was cloud cover, and no moon. I couldn't see anything. The houses in this street looked dilapidated and abandoned. This didn't feel right. The house that T-Bone said he was at had boarded up front windows with terrible graffiti tags on them, and there weren't any lights on. I called T-Bone and got no answer. I redialed and thought it was about to ring out when he picked up. "Hey T-Bone, I'm out front." "Oh, cool. Come on in." "No, come out to the car." "Hang on a sec," he said and then hung up. I was thinking, crap, I hardly know this guy. He's been to a few parties I went to, we hung out, but I didn't know anything about him. I saw him emerge from the side of the house, pushing through bushes that blocked the pathway. I was the only car parked on the street. He saw me and gestured for me to come over. I had no idea who he was with, so I thought it was time to get into character. I took my jacket off so I was only wearing a white singlet and put my filthy black trucker cap on that I kept in the glove box. I was hoping this would give me a look that said, "Don't mess with me." My friends often joke about how I look tougher than I am. I have some football and kickboxing induced facial scars combined with a pretty big physique from smashing weights for years. I was big enough and scary looking enough to be intimidating. But truth be known, I'm really a marshmallow who avoids confrontations. I shook hands with T-Bone in the front yard of this place, and felt at ease when he gave me a happy greeting and thanked me for coming out all this way. He told me to follow him, and we went through the bushes around the back of this place. I could hear music, sounds like they were pumping dubstep through crappy distorting speakers. I could hear a few people's voices and I could smell cigarette smoke. T-Bone ripped the back door open and the smell and sound hit me harder. I've been to some nasty house parties, but this was horrific. There were 3 of them in the kitchen. There was a flashlight attached by a string to the 12-foot ceiling, swinging back and forth in a slow pendulum style. It was the only lighting. The swinging light made it difficult to see the people in the kitchen, but with each sway I would catch a glimpse of their faces. They were absolute toothless junkies, all shirtless, skinny, with bad tattoos. We entered the kitchen and one of them closed the door behind us and stood in front of it, arms folded, as if he were guarding it. One of them came forward and told me his name was Jay. Not like he was introducing himself, it was more of a statement. His face looked like he'd been on meth for years. He sized me up and then looked at T-Bone and said, "I thought you said he was small." T-Bone looked at him in total shock. As Jay turned to T-Bone, the flashlight swung past and I noticed he was holding a big screwdriver behind his back. Now I realized what was happening, and I felt like an idiot. I've walked into an ambush. Get a guy with a crap load of drugs to come around and rob him. Jay turned back to me. He was about 6 feet away from me and he showed me the screwdriver and said, "What have you got for me?" with a big front tooth missing smile. The fact I was so tired and pissed off kind of worked for me because I didn't show that I was actually bricking it. I squared up to him and said in a no-nonsense tone, "Give me all the cash and I'll show you." To which Jay replied, "Nah, can't. Didn't T-Bone tell ya? These were on the tick, mate." On the tick, meaning I'll pay you later, or never in this case. I looked at T-Bone, who looked back at me and shook his head and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Jay looked at me with such hatred, it looked as though he was in pain. "Give us your gear." It wasn't so dark in this hellhole, he could have easily seen over my inflated pockets, where I'd stashed everything. I looked at the guy in front of the door, and as soon as our eyes met, he put his arm over the door handle, confirming that he wasn't going to let me leave. We all stood there trading glances. The swinging light made everyone's shadows look like they were moving. Jay didn't like this. T-Bone broke the silence and said, "Jay, chill out. I'll get the money." And he left to the kitchen. I thought he was going to bail on me. Who has 2K cash just lying around? Jay slowly came towards me, pointing this screwdriver at me. He said in a raspy, matter-of-fact tone, "I'll kill ya. I'll do the time. Just try me." "That's cute," I reply. Then the painful anger came back to his face. I've never seen anything like it. I slowly put my feet into a fighting stance to prepare myself for what was about to happen. T-Bone walked back in and said, "Here's the cash," which briefly diffused the situation. I did a quick count. 1,700. Close enough. I threw the envelope of gear to Jay and the door guard moved and I got the hell out of there. T-Bone followed me and tried to give me an apology. "Mate, I had no idea that was going to happen. I'm so sorry." I just said, "You owe me $300 and drove away. I never got the extra 300 and I never dealt drugs again. I also thankfully never met Jay again. A few weeks ago, I had a weird experience. I bought myself my first car lately, and I'm fairly new to driving, but I needed to get to and from my new place of work. I usually work in the afternoon, and on this day I took a little nap right before I had to leave for work. I was half asleep when suddenly a weird voice told me, "Don't take the highway today." It was so clear, it startled me and awoke me. I got ready for work and stepped into the car. Despite having this weird feeling, I took the highway. While driving on the highway, I was almost hit by a truck that didn't let me through. My car made this scary loud beeping noise I've never heard before, and then suddenly the accelerator stopped working. I had to stop on the side of the highway. I was so scared, and I remember the voice immediately, cursing myself that I didn't listen to it. I honestly believe whatever that was tried to warn me and save me, because this could have turned out a lot worse. My parents bought their first house back in 1972. It was a fixer-upper, but they decided to move in right away and fix things when time and money permitted. Within a few days of moving there, the new neighbors came over to introduce themselves. They also let my parents know that the previous owners had moved out after a nasty divorce. They had lost their second child to SIDS, and their relationship went downhill from there. My parents were horrified, more so because they were newly pregnant and couldn't imagine going through such a thing. They eventually pretty much forgot all about it. Life went on, and they were in love with their new life and their new house. In preparation for the baby, they decided to wallpaper the nursery. Now my dad told my mum there was no need in wallpapering the inside of the closet, but she insisted. She was kneeling down, scraping off old paint inside the closet when her eyes fell upon something that made her blood turn to ice. Written in crayon, about the eye level for a kindergartner, in childish scrawl was written, "I killed the baby." I want to start by saying that I still work for this company, and I still have anxiety every time I go to work. The company is huge, one of the biggest names in the world. For the purposes of privacy, let's just call it Big Cheese. I also want to mention that I have crippling social anxiety. I credit this to being homeschooled most of my life, and this will make a lot more sense later. Well, September of last year, I was fresh out of high school and was looking for work. I needed this job immediately because I was living with my significant other, and we were barely getting by. My father and grandfather Both either worked or had worked for this company for a long period of time, and it was something that garnered a lot of respect in my family. So of course I was thrilled when I got my first interview. It went great and was all set to start training, which involved a few classes and on-the-job training. The classes were awkward to say the least, but nonetheless informative. Well, after the classes had finished, I joined a group of fellow trainees to tour the work environment. And this is where I first met the creepy co-worker. He was in the very back of my group, seemed a little shy, and didn't really talk to the rest of the group unless he was trying to make an awkward joke to join in. At first I kind of felt bad for him. He seemed harmless, but definitely awkward and out the loop. Knowing as much as I did going into the company, I made an effort to inform him and update him with all the things the trainers were asking of us. He just seemed so lost and confused. I thought I was doing a good thing by helping him out. Even my significant other thought so at the time. The training went by without any hiccups. As soon as we were given the location of where we'd start out, ironically enough, the only person that I had gotten to know, creepy co-worker, had the same area I did. Realizing that we'd be starting out together and both didn't know anyone, we decided to exchange phone numbers. That was so that we could both meet up the next week so that we wouldn't get lost. I thought nothing of this when he asked for my number, and just assumed it was more because he was nervous and didn't know anyone besides me. Boy, did I live to regret that. The first day of training, we met up at basically a flagpole so that we could wait up for the job trainer Christy. When he got off the employee shuttle, he started texting me asking where I was. I was in the smoking section a little ways away, killing my fears with a cigarette, and messaged him back telling him where I was, and he asked if he could join. I didn't like how nervous it felt, and I wasn't comfortable with anyone joining me during this time of reprieve. But I saw him coming over anyway, so I scooted over to make room on the bench. This didn't matter, because apparently he was going to sit as close to me as possible anyway. I hate touch or people being in my personal bubble, and being a victim of other trauma, touch was something only people very close to me had permission to do. Creepy co-worker then proceeded to ask me if he could bum a cigarette, and I'm not that good at saying no, so gave him one. After he lit up and returned my lighter, I just kind of ignored the unwarranted invasion of my space. We talked since and had about 30 minutes to kill, speaking about normal stuff like how do you feel about the company, where do you want to end up in, and noticed he was wearing tattoo covering sleeves, so asked him about them. He pulled down the sleeves and started going over almost each and every one, all something to do with either a love interest or something geeky. I listened out of mild curiosity, but quickly got uncomfortable when he started pulling out his phone and showing me pictures of ones he drew. I was uncomfortable because he kept showing me pictures of himself as well, mostly photos of him shirtless, and I didn't really find that appropriate. He mentioned he was a Marine, and that he had gained too much weight after his last tour. I apologized out of sympathy, but suggested that it was nothing to be ashamed of. Unfortunately, after that, he kept smiling at me in a way I deemed to be admiration. I had seen this look from my fiancé, so I knew somewhere I'd messed up. I quickly turned the conversation to more appropriate stuff like music taste. He seemed interested in what music I liked too much, and decided he should make a playlist. I said it really wasn't necessary, but he insisted. Later into that very day during training, he kept purposefully doing kind things, like taking heavy boxes from my hands, or taking the odd jobs he deemed too grueling for a lady. I was a little annoyed, but mostly just glad the jobs meant that he'd have to go a different area and give me some space. He'd always find a way back to appear beside me and scare me. I hated being scared, and he laughed it off every time. I was more than uncomfortable. At this point, a nervousness had settled in the pit of my stomach. At the end of the night, after we'd been sent to go home and come back the next day, he decided to walk me out. We'd walk back through the maze my workplace actually is, all the way to the employee costume center / lockers, and it was there that we had gotten our work costume and stored our regular clothes in lockers. Well, I was having trouble remembering the combination and couldn't find the little slip of paper that told me it. A creepy co-worker came up to me and smirked, seemingly waiting for me to finish up. I thought he had left at this point and wasn't expecting him to still be there. After a few tries, he reached over and out the combination of my locker for me. This was a serious red flag. He had already memorized my combination, and now I felt as though my privacy was completely gone. Again, I, awkward and unsure of what to do in this situation, was like, "Thank you," but suggested that he let me figure it out next time. I was hoping that he would, so that he would forget my combination. Remember this for later. After changing back into my regular clothes in the girls' locker, I came out and he was still waiting for me. I asked him why he had waited, so he could have just gone home sooner, to which he replied, "Because I'm a gentleman. A lady should be walked to her car so that she can be kept safe." I told him that my significant other was waiting to pick me up. He asked where, and I told him down the street like an idiot. I still don't know why I complied with this creep as much as I did, but I had never been in a situation like this before. He told me that was too far for me to walk, and that it wasn't safe, so he offered to drive me to my significant other's car. Due to how tired I was and how much I ate from the day, I didn't have the strength to argue. I mean, he was creepy, but also nice. I chalked up the creepiness to him just being awkward. So without anything else weird happening, he took me to my significant other, whom I had been texting the entire time, just to let him know where I was and what was going on. I had a deep gut feeling that I should text him everything I knew about the guy, so I did. When I pulled up, I immediately got out the car. My boyfriend sat there leaning against the car with his arms crossed. He wasn't very happy about him giving me a ride, but nonetheless thanked the creepy co-worker for getting him to me safely. The co-worker nodded, seeming to smirk at my boyfriend the whole time. This was when my boyfriend first got a bad feeling about the guy. So we got home and my boyfriend warned me about him, telling me he wasn't getting a good vibe from him. It was not 3 minutes after that I got a text from the co-worker. He started sending me songs and memes and telling me things like, "I really feel like you get me." Now I was definitely concerned. What the hell did I get myself into? Why did I have to be so goddamn nice to people? The following day at work, I was on my last day of training and I had a massive pain attack. I have a chronic illness and the situation ended with none of the managers listening to me when I told them that the pain doesn't last and comes and goes. They rushed me to the emergency room. A stretcher carried me through work while I was crying and trying to hide my face. The customers were quick to take out their phones and film the whole thing. It was one of the worst experiences of my life, but what happened next is even worse. I received about 20 texts from the creepy co-worker asking how I was. At this point I was done, I just didn't respond, and after a few random memes he started texting me that he was drunk and thinking about not going home to his wife. This was the first time he'd ever mentioned to me he had a wife. I was dumbfounded. Why was he so concerned about me when he had someone else who loved him enough to marry? I didn't respond. I went to bed. In the morning I woke up to my boyfriend looking at my phone in anger. My heart sank and I could only imagine what the creepy co-worker had sent now. My boyfriend showed me the only text I had gotten since the night before. It was from his wife texting me from his phone. She wrote a message that the creepy co-worker had a problem getting attached to women. She warned me that I should stay away from him, and then told me her name, my name. And after that, she explained that my name was a thing for him. All of his exes had that very same name. Now at that point, my boyfriend was telling me not to go back to this job, that it wasn't worth it. But that's not me. I wasn't going to let one creep ruin this opportunity for me. The job meant the world to me, and I never wanted to let it go. So I told him if this continued, I'd go to HR, but in all honesty, I really didn't want to do that. I was the new girl. I didn't want the first month on the job for me to be fighting a harassment case. Biting my nails the whole way I went to work. Suddenly, the creepy coworker wasn't hovering anymore. I thought this might have been him being embarrassed, and I was pretty convinced I wasn't going to have a problem after that. Big mistake. On my lunch break, he made sure to go on his lunch early and come find me. His normally enthusiastic attitude was gone, replaced with what felt like anger. I was scared. He came up to me and let me know that his wife is full of crap and just angry because he was divorcing her. At this point, I didn't want to have anything to do with him, so I kept quiet, hoping that he'd take the hint. He told me he had a gift for me and that he'd give it to me after the shift, quickly walking away before I could respond. After my shift, I go outside of the work area to the lockers. I had waited an extra hour and a half, even taking a closing position from a coworker, just so that he'd go home before me. Well, my lock wasn't locked all the way, and I was now freaked out. I opened the locker to grab my bag and go, but noticed a rolled up piece of drawing paper. I know what kind it is because I am an artist myself. Unrolling it, it was a naked girl that resembled my video game character on World of Warcraft. I had briefly mentioned my WoW addiction to my group on the first group training day. I didn't even realize he had heard any of that, much less memorize the information. Suddenly he walks up, though we should have been long gone by then, and confronts me. He asks me if I like it, and because he seemed angry, I said yes. I suggested he didn't do it anymore as my boyfriend wouldn't like this kind of gift at all. He rolled his eyes and playfully giggled at me, as if I were joking with him, but I wasn't. Not only did he follow me the whole way out of the work grounds, he got me to the employee shuttle that I had to get on to have witnesses. He sat right next to me, leaning on me. I felt like a deer in headlights, mentally begging someone to suggest that he shouldn't be that close to me, but no one paid any attention. Instead, I spent the whole drive trying to get this man to pull his arm off my shoulders, and I felt nauseated, and my head was spinning. After we got off, I practically dashed off the bus and ran to my boyfriend, who parked the car at the entrance to the employee parking zone. I got in the car and told him to go. He took off and I started crying. I told my boyfriend, and he was pissed. He wanted to turn around and punch the creep, but I talked him out of it through tears. I promised that I would talk to my managers after that. Well, I kept looking for the right time to pull a manager aside, but never got a chance. The next night I went in. Now, creepy coworker's attitude did a whole 180. He was being extremely weird, playful, and then he crossed the final line. He grabbed my butt where consumers could easily see him. The coworkers kind of laughed and thought it was a game. Because of this, I was pissed and pushed to my limit. I went after him. I legitimately punched him in the arse and shouted in his face, "How do you like that, huh?" Seething, he seemed unfazed by my anger. Instead, he laughed it off and winked at me. I went down to the basement for the employee bathroom and quickly threw up the contents of my stomach, cried in the stall and prayed to God that this would stop. I quickly made an excuse, used my chronic illness, and went home. Fast forward a few weeks. He had completely swapped out his shifts so he wouldn't work with me. I felt like I'd won the battle. I sent a message and he realized he'd crossed boundaries. Until the night before Christmas Eve, I had a terrible feeling as my boyfriend was driving me to work that night. I felt gross. I got to work and he was there, flirting with other girls, suddenly having this big ego I'd never seen him display before. Like I said, when I met him he was shy and awkward. It's like his personality flipped every time I saw him. I never knew which side of him I was going to get on. That night he actually stomped off, as all the other co-workers, including myself, closed the joint. We were scrubbing like normal, and he didn't seem at all together. So he clocked out early, and I relaxed. I figured he'd gotten in trouble since one of our floor managers seemed to be upset that he'd clocked out without permission. I was there extra late. The evening festivities were done for the night, and my zone was pretty much closed off for consumers. So I walked through the massive property that is my work to get to the street. I had started taking new ways to meet my boyfriend, who picked me up so that I couldn't be followed. This time I was going to walk straight out of the grounds and onto the street where the bus stops, where my boyfriend would be waiting at the curb. I was about halfway through my approximately 12-minute walk, and it was a dark area. And out of nowhere, as I'm sure you've already guessed, the creepy co-worker shows up and starts yelling my name and following me from behind. I pretended not to notice and walked faster. He yells my name again and seems angrier, so I sprint for it. I sprint all the way to cross the shuttle zone and end up crashing into someone's chest. Thank God it was my actual boyfriend who had a really bad feeling and wanted to be as close to my work as possible. I looked back. The creep got on the shuttle and was staring from the window, smiling like the Cheshire Cat the whole time. Never in my life had I been so terrified. After that next night was Christmas Eve, and I was supposed to work, but just knew something bad was going to happen. So crying the whole time because I knew I had to earn a bunch of points for calling out to avoid him, I asked, crying, the lady on the phone if I was going to get fired, and she said she honestly couldn't say. I respected that, but I knew I wasn't done. I wasn't going to let this creep make me lose this job I'd worked so hard to get, even changing my appearance to fit their strict standards. No. So I wrote to the only person I could think of, my trainer Christy. She was the lead, and she was the kindest girl you'd ever meet. Gold of heart. You knew just being her friend meant you'd have a trusted confidant for life. I told her everything, sent her screenshots of the texts he sent me, and finally told someone with an ounce of leadership that I was scared to go to work. Immediately she responded and asked if she could tell the managers, and even though I was incredibly nervous, I told her yes. The next day I was pulled in, and God bless my ex-manager Christopher, because he was shocked at everything that had happened to me and quickly helped me write a report for HR. He led me through the steps and even changed the schedule so I wouldn't be working with the creepy coworker unless he specifically traded shifts. 2 months go by, and I'm well acquainted with the responsibilities for my work at this point, and I'm comfortable, but of course there's no stopping a stalker. He had traded a shift and was working the night shifts with me. He was angry every time he looked at me, and I avoided looking at him at all costs. Then around halfway through my shift, I'm down in the basement coming back from the restroom. I'm walking up the steps that lead down to my work area, and then I feel someone behind me. Before I could think a clear thought, I was pushed against the wall, hand beside my head. He leans in and says, "You should smile more," and then he chuckles and walks away. I feel pretty hysterical at this point and run to the closest lead, crying and trying to explain what happened. It was at this point that my manager Christopher, pissed off that HR was taking so long to investigate my case, went to them to speed it up. Well, after 4 months of an interview process with HR, finally the case was resolved. And not only was he let go, but I was doing really well in my job. Nothing to worry me about not paying attention to my duties. Creepy coworker has left me alone ever since, but sometimes I get random friend requests from guys with no picture and always similar names. Creepy coworker, leave me alone. I won't ever be intimidated again, and I will win every battle you throw at me. Let's never meet again. This story takes place 10 years ago. I was 14 at the time. I grew up in an old farmhouse far out on a rural road. Cornfields surrounded our home and our closest neighbors were 2 to 3 miles away. The nearest town was a 15-minute drive. One thing that was really nice about living out there was that you didn't get a lot of strangers knocking at your door to either sell or talk religion with you, but we did get a few. One night it was just my mother and I home, making baked goods for a fundraiser for my little brother's Boy Scout troop. Dad and brother were out helping my uncle with some cows, if I remember rightly. We were bustling around the kitchen, talking and laughing. Mum and I have always been close. Soon we heard a knock at the door, just an average normal knock. A tap tap tap. Mum, to herself, and took off her dishing gloves to open the door. I stood at the kitchen island, rolling out some dough for a few pies, but also watching my mother go to the door. I had a slight twinge of anxiety in my stomach, but chalked it up as being one of my normal flurries. As my mum walked towards the door, the person on the other side gave another tap, this time in a rhythm. My mum stopped. She turned and began walking back to the kitchen with a pale look on her face. She went to our kitchen window that seemed to face out towards the porch. She went to the side where you'd be able to see the porch clearly. Mum pulled back the curtain enough to peek and not be noticed from the outside. The look on her face deepened. She went to the other side of the window then, to look out to the driveway. I had stopped what I was doing at this point, deciding that pie crusts probably weren't that important in this moment, as the feeling in my stomach was in a full-blown flurry. Mum's eyes widened as she looked out. She then closed the curtain and looked at the floor. The look on her face was angry but also scared. She walked over and grabbed my wrist and walked us to the closet as she quietly asked me if I had my cell phone. I did. She pulled out my dad's prized Louisville Slugger from the closet. The person at the door started banging at the door hard. I gasped a bit. Mum looked at me and shushed me, then took my arm again and walked me towards my parents' bedroom, locking the door and windows as we went. At one point, she stopped at the window in our living room and peeked out. She closed it quickly and let out a frustrated noise. We got to the bedroom and she pulled me in and locked the door. She took my phone and began dialing as she gave me the bat. She sat me down on the floor on the side where I'd be hidden from the door and opened the closet to get the gun case. She talked quietly on the phone and I was terrified and couldn't focus on what she was saying. She pulled out my dad's shotgun and quickly loaded it. I looked at her, scared as she hung up. She pulls me up again and walked me out the bedroom. We creeped back over to the other side of the house where the bathroom was. Mum gave me my phone and ushered me inside. She set down the gun and looked at me with both hands on her shoulders. You need to listen to me. There are some men outside and they're walking around the side of the house. I looked at her with wide eyes. I could feel myself shaking. Why? What do they want? I don't know, but you need to stay in here, lock the door, and don't come out until I tell you. Understand me? I nodded, and she squeezed my shoulders. I'm going to barricade the door from the other side. I will not move the barricade until I let you know that it's me. I knew what she was saying immediately. Crawl out the bathroom window and run if it's moved otherwise. My mum shut the door and I quickly locked it. I heard her move the quartz chest in front of the door, a very heavy box with lots of quartz from over the years. I sat on the floor in front of the window clutching the baseball bat. I sat there for what seemed like hours, but was merely 5 minutes. While I sat there, I heard 2 footsteps outside the window, 2 deep voices talking quietly. You sure they're in there? Maybe no one's home. Nah, there's at least 2 women in there. Heard them talking at the door. Saw a guy and a kid leave when we passed the house earlier. I shivered and started to hyperventilate, but quickly covered my mouth with a towel to mute it. Who were they? What did they want? Why were they here? Soon I heard another voice. Guys, let's go. Charlie spotted cops down the road. Then I heard 3 sets of feet running towards the front of the house. I was crying at this point, tears pouring down my face. Was it over? Were they leaving? A few more minutes go by and I hear a man's voice in the house. I started to panic and huddled into the corner of the bathroom, and I heard my mum's voice on the other side of the bathroom door. It's me. The sheriff's here, they're gone. I'm moving the trunk. I got up and unlocked the door and opened it to find the sheriff and my mum moving the trunk out the way. I quickly ran to my mum's arms and we stood there holding each other. The sheriff said he had quite a few more officers chasing down the van and that he needed to ask me and my mum some questions. My mum nodded and we walked to the kitchen where there was the smell of burnt cookies in the air. The sheriff asked us questions and that's when I found out what my mum saw. When she looked out and saw the man who was knocking at our door, she knew something was off immediately. He was casually dressed, gym shorts and a wife beater, not something a salesman or person of a church would wear when coming around. So then my mum thought that maybe his car broke down or something and that he was looking for help. So she looked out at the driveway and saw something that made her stomach drop. There was a van in our drive, parked in a way that wouldn't allow my mother's car to leave, with a man in the passenger seat and another leaning in towards the front of the van, talking to the passenger. But Mum noticed that even though both were still, the van was still slightly rocking, like there were more people inside. As my mum and I were finishing up with the sheriff, a deputy walked in and he looked pale. He looked at my mum, the sheriff and me, and the deputy went, "Sir, we were able to catch up with the van. They lost control and swerved into the ditch, actually." "Any of them hurt?" "No, they're fine, but we have them in custody." The sheriff quirked an eyebrow. "There were 5 men in the van. We asked them what they were doing out here, and what they walked around the house like they did for." "And? What did they say?" "They said they were vacuum salesmen, sir. That they were a team out trying to sell their product they made." The sheriff scoffed for a bit. "Well, Jones ended up checking the van and... Well, what? Do we have a drug bust or something?" The deputy gulped and looked at my mum and me again. "No, sir, not what we found at all." They took my mum outside and told her what they found. She was horrified and came back, sobbing and holding me. After that, they phoned my dad, and he came rushing home. My other uncle, a mountain of a man, stayed that night just in case. Dad and Mum spent no expense on home security and taught both of us kids how to shoot and load a gun. My aunt and uncle gave us one of their German Shepherd puppies as well. Mum had to train him to be an attack dog, though you wouldn't be able to tell. When not in defense, he was a dopey, lovable pup. This still wasn't enough to settle Mum though, and brother and I ended up going to self-defense lessons too. My cousins were sent with us. It wasn't until a few years later that I found out what was in the van. Coincidentally, we were making cookies and other homemade candy for a Christmas party. I finally asked my mum about it, and she was shocked that I asked, but knew I'd find out eventually. So what was in the van? They found rope, tape, burlap saps and even sedatives, as well as a gun, several of them, and what the police described as burner phones. When they had taken all the guys back, and after hours of questioning, one of them broke and said they were having no luck in nabbing anyone in town, so they went out to rural areas. The closest town is a very tightly knit community where everyone watches each other's back. This terrified me. I would have never have guessed it. To this day, I'm very careful about whom I open the door for, and I can't sleep unless I have some sort of weapon in the bedside table. It's really shattered my trust in others. I go out and automatically assume most people are going to hurt me. My therapist is trying to help me with this. I sincerely hope that I never have to go through another situation like this again. I met Abby on the first day of 2nd grade. I saw her snapping her fingers on the bus seat next to mine. I couldn't snap my fingers, so I was intrigued, and I sat there with her so she could teach me. To this day, I can still only snap my fingers on the hand that she taught me. Our friendship was never like the ones they show in movies. Abby had a pretty hard home life, and eventually fell in with the wrong crowd. She was into drugs, alcohol and parties, while I was into books, studying and animals. Still, I felt like it was my job to save her from it. She was, after all, my best friend. The summer before senior year, I was 17, and feeling rebellious. I'd stay more often at Abby's house where her mum would let us drink in a more safe environment, but then Abby met a guy and started dating him. Ryan. He creeped me out. He was about 5 years our senior, and just off. One day, Abby suggested that we go meet up with Ryan and his friend Kyle. It turned out that Kyle was the local drug dealer. I wasn't overly comfortable with this, but I wanted to impress Abby and definitely didn't want to leave her alone with them. They started smoking pot, and eventually I joined them. The hot air combined with the alcohol we'd already consumed made me feel sick, and Abby took me outside to cool off. and I laid down on the lawn. I will admit it, I am a total lightweight. Pretty soon the guys come out to check on us, and I could hear them laughing and saying something, but honestly in that moment I didn't care. Ryan took us home, and the next morning, Abby had told me that my leggings had been sheer, and the guy had been talking about the show I had put on for them. For a while, I refused to be around Ryan or Kyle. They were weird, I didn't like them, and they made me feel super uncomfortable. But I was young and dumb, and going through some tough stuff. When Abby suggested I come round again, even though Ryan was there, I went anyway. Right after I got there, Ryan starts talking about how much Kyle liked me. Not wanting to be rude, I said that was flattering, but that I wasn't interested. Abby suggested to cheer me up that we go to Ryan's house and have some drinks. At this point, even Abby's mum didn't like Ryan being around. I should have known it was a red flag if even she didn't like him. Abby said that they'd have a cute guy come over for me, so I was placated. We get there, start drinking, and Ryle said Kyle was coming over for a moment to liven up the party. I pulled Abby aside and told her how uncomfortable I was with that, but she assured me that he wouldn't stick around long and that my guy would be there soon. Kyle arrives and I'm already smashed. They start smoking and I couldn't stand the smell, so I tell Abby I'm going to lay down for a bit and to come get me when my guy gets here. As I said, I was drunk. I don't hold my alcohol well and barely drink to this day. The next thing I remember, I'm waking up, naked in bed. Kyle is leaning over me with his member in hand. I don't know why, but at that moment I laughed. I guess I just didn't know how to process the information, or perhaps the irony of the situation that I was in. I was depressed that summer due to the fact that I was coming to terms with being sexually abused as a child, and it's ironic that in trying to get over it, it was happening again. My mind works in weird ways. Kyle sits back on his haunches, bewildered, and I scurry out the room to find Abby and tell her what happened. Abby and Ryan were right outside the door and had heard me giggle. As soon as I start freaking out, Abby and Ryan start berating me for laughing at Kyle. I couldn't explain why I'd done it, and I don't even have a rational reason now. Both Abby and Ryan said that after I had laid down for a while, I'd come back in and started making passes at Kyle, so we'd gone back to the room. Being naive and 17, I believed Abby. But I apologized to Kyle, who was now irate, and told him I just wasn't comfortable, and made Abby take me home, and I stopped hanging out with them. Something about the situation just didn't sit right with me. That fall, when school started, a mutual friend came up to me, and what she told me will haunt me for the rest of my life. The first time I had met Kyle, and he had seen the show I put on, he told Ryan and Abby that if he could get me to sleep with him, he would give them free drugs. When Abby realized I wouldn't sleep with Kyle of my own free will, she decided to get me drunk enough to not know better. She was my best friend. I had known her for a decade. Last I heard of Abby, she was in and out of the psych ward. Ryan was abusing her, and he made her drop out of college to support his habits. I don't know what became of Kyle, but honestly, I don't want to know. So Ryan, Abby and Kyle, let's not meet again. My mum once stopped to help an overturned car on the side of a highway. We got out and called the police. I saw the man choking the girl he was with, went to tell my mum, and she waved me off. Guy came up, tried to get her off the phone and asked me if I could help. I sized him up. He was about 3 times my size, and I'm a scrawny little teenager, so I realized the only way we're going to get out of this is by playing cool and running. My mum would not let me talk to her, and if I tried to raise it to being serious or yelling or anything to get her attention, it would have gotten his too, as he was clearly intoxicated. He asked if I could help move the car. I had assumed it was because telling her to get off the phone wasn't working, so he was trying to bait me over to the car to hurt me. Or he was so drunk that he actually thought we would move an upside-down car Upper Bank. I told him that was a 10-man job, and his wife screamed at him, saying she got him punching her and crashing the car on camera, and that she sent it to his sister. He grabbed my hat, ripped it off with some hair, then grabbed my throat and threw me. I had grabbed my knife before we left, for almost no reason other than, I feel like something might happen. It's always advised to not escalate, but, when this guy punched my mom and threw her down the bank after taking the phone, I didn't care. What should or shouldn't I do? I was ready to kill for real. For the only time in my life so far, going through how to level the playing field with this guy and a tiny knife. I told him what I had, and that I would cut him if he touched my mother again, and he focused on me. I jogged back and he came to me, and every time he looked back, I would reiterate what I'd do. My mother told me to run, and I told her to get to the car, and she did. Then I let him get distracted, and I ran around him. Almost got hit by a car that was speeding on the interstate, then made it to the car. Waited for her to start it before I got in and drove to the police station. He was apprehended a few hours later, 2 felony charges, one for choking his wife, and the second one assaulting an officer. We call the police when we see people in crashes now. I still have nightmares of what could have happened if I decided to use it or if he had gotten to me. I still put my keys in between my fists whenever I'm walking at night and someone's nearby. I've never had to imagine what it would be like to cut someone or see them bleed. My mother still breathes faster every time we drive by that spot. This has been a PSA. It has long been rumored that the house next to me has been haunted. People would come and go like it was a perpetual revolving door. The longest anyone stayed was about 6 months. It was a normal house, upper middle class, tan with a white picket fence, a good-sized deck and a decent yard. The only thing slightly creepy about this house was that a man who had owned the house for years and moved had buried all of his dead pets in the backyard. So it was an animal graveyard of sorts. It sat empty for quite some time, and this is where my experience begins. I was in high school when it happened, probably my freshman year. I had gotten together with 2 friends, Carol and Erin, and we were trying to figure out what to do to keep from being bored. Someone, maybe it was me, decided to go check the house out and see what all the fuss was about. We walked through the open gate and into the backyard. A cable man had recently come by to do some work, which was very odd since no one lived there. After standing in the yard for a minute, we decided to play hide and seek. We opted to draw the boundary line at the front yard and backyard. Going inside was off limits. I would count and they would hide. Well, I found Carol almost immediately, and she decided to help me find Erin. We looked for a few minutes or so when we heard a noise that sounded like movement in the house, kind of like someone scurrying across the floor. We assumed that our friend had broken the rules and gone inside. "Erin," we shouted at the house, "you know inside's off limits." We expected to hear the door open and Erin come walking out, talking about how she just wanted to look, when we hear her come out the bushes behind us, explaining that it wasn't her in the house. We get a look of horror on our faces, and slowly turn to look at the large window that overlooks the yard. The house is pitch black, so it's impossible to see inside. We aren't looking for very long when I see something directly in front of the window. It was a young girl, maybe 11 or 12. The only thing that was out of place was that she wasn't from this time period. She was wearing a dark dress with a high collar and 2 braids down her back. She looked sad and mouthed something that I understand to be "help me." I can't figure out what she means when I see something behind her that made my blood run cold. It's a man about 6 foot 5 feet tall and sinister. He had a look of pure hatred on his face, and his hands reach out as if to take the girl standing in front of him. As fast as he appears, they vanish. I come back to reality and turn to look at my friends. They looked like they'd seen a ghost. I turn to my friend Erin and ask what she saw. She describes the little girl exactly, and saw the man as well. We hightailed it out of there as fast as we could, and have never been back. My friend Kari is a very quiet girl. She's extremely nice, but very introverted and reserved. I went to a school with her previous to this one, and we tried to get her involved in events, but she always turned us down and went home to hang out with her grandmother, even in university. She is still expected to call home every night to show that she's safe and in her dorm room. One day, Kari had gotten friendly one lecture with a girl who sat beside her, Danielle. Since they both lived on residence, they walked home together and decided to stop in the dining hall for a chat and some food. Everything was normal until Danielle steered the topic into some rather odd conversation. First, she began telling her how she had been in a mental health facility for trying to kill someone in high school. She began telling my friend that when she first arrived in this city, she traveled downtown at night, hoping to find an intoxicated homeless person that she would be able to overpower and kill. She told my friend of different ways to disembowel cats and offered to show her how to do it. She told my friend of how she wanted to kill different roommates since she first arrived on res, but was too worried she would be caught. She also admitted that the only reason she was taking law and forensics was to learn how to commit crime better. Kari, already shy and timid around normal people, quickly excused herself and left. 5 minutes later, their encounter ended, and I got a Facebook message telling me the entire situation and asking what she should do. I advised her she tell her professor, which she did. Both of us thought the girl needed help, but we assumed that she was probably lying or at least exaggerating in order to get attention. A few days later, I got another message from Kari telling me about the events that followed. After Kari told the professor, she was called in the next day by police. The school took the threats and claims very seriously, but the police told her not to worry. They also thought she was exaggerating or lying, but told her they were going to take her in that night for an evaluation. Not long after, Kari was told that Danielle would not be coming back to the residence. She had been admitted to a facility and was banned from school. A few months later, we were informed of the charges that were being laid against Danielle: animal cruelty, animal neglect, and possession of indecent images of underage minors. They'd found videos of her mutilating animals. With my own research, I found pages of her online discussing how she liked necrophilia, etc. She proudly boasted about all her fetishes and claimed online that she had ended lives before. It turns out she had indeed been in care because she had tried to end someone's life, and had been kept in confinement since she had been removed from school as she was considered a danger to staff and other residents. On res, her roommates had claimed that she was up all night and rarely left her room. They also reported a strange smell coming from it, and that she was a bit weird. In her room, the police also found a kit that she was preparing. They found written fantasies about breaking and entering, all kinds of sexual assault, including with a minor, and believed the kit was being prepared for when she would finally go and live out the fantasies. They also told Kari that they believed she admitted all of this to her within an hour of meeting her, because she had somehow thought she had found someone with similar interests and was looking to partner with her. Last I heard, she pleaded guilty, but her sentencing was postponed as they was doing further psychiatric evaluations on her. Fun times. I forgot to mention one thing, but get this, guys. She's a Romanian orphan. No joke. I used to work at a dessert stand in a local mall. It was one of those cute little single worker booths, meaning most of what I had to do was interact with customers and learn how to use a cash register. When I first began working the job, standing for abnormally long shifts as there was no chairs in the booth, and having so much to memorize was exhausting. Not to mention getting back late, having loads of homework to do. Thanks, high school. It didn't help. I assumed that things weren't going to get much worse since my manager told me it was easy to get the hang of, but boy was I wrong. Generally, people in the mall are polite and communicative, but inevitably you run into some weirdos or entitled people at times, especially in a service job. I was perfectly aware of that, and you sort of get used to the customer patterns as you work. So those people were not much of an inconvenience to interact with. However, just for a bit of context, I'm super awkward, an extra memey type of person who uses humor in bad situations and also has anxiety, which isn't good for social interactions, which means dealing with rather unusual people is a struggle. Oh, I'm feeling lethargic at the same time, because a bit of stuttering and slows my reaction as well. The story. When I had just finished training for this job, there was a presumably middle-aged man who approached the booth. I brightly greeted him, thinking he'd ask questions about desserts. Instead, he mutters something along the lines of, "You're very sweet, you're good," and walks off, assuming that since his English clearly wasn't his first language, he was referring to the food. I ignored it, but I did get this odd feeling about him. With my forced grin and a confused, "Thanks?" he left. My manager, who was working in the nearby food court seats, happened to catch a glimpse of this. She made eye contact with me, clearly uncomfortable, and asked if everything was okay, but I shrugged it off. A few minutes later, he abruptly trotted up again. This time he made wide gestures with his lanky arms while grumbling. "You're lucky to be here. I'm attracted to you, but I'm old. If I wasn't 71 and I was your age, I would date you. Tell your friends and boyfriends that." And then went off in an incomprehensible tangent about my appearance before slinking off again. My tired mind wasn't exactly registering what just happened, so I just stared into the small distance of the mall, spooked to the max. I guess I was frowning pretty profusely since my manager became concerned and quickly slid behind the counter to firmly ask if I was fine, to which I replied there was a slight creepy man who already approached me twice. I told her that it wasn't a big deal, but she knew that I was just trying to dismiss the threat and insisted on staying. She planted herself beside me and we both shared an unsaid feeling that something more was going to happen. Bingo. A few minutes passed before he rushed up to the counter again. He began trying to restate what he was saying earlier through a crooked smile, revealing a row of yellow teeth. He was leaning over the counter as far as he possibly could, and his beady eyes were fixated on my grimace. Startled by his audacity, my manager brusquely hissed, "Can I help you?" To which he moistly breathed, "Oh no, I just wanted to talk to her." Never once did he break eye contact. He continued to tell me how my complexion was very good and that I should tell all my friends and boyfriends that. He went off about how my looks would be good for sale. His speech was very repetitive and just plain off-putting. At this point, my manager and I were both thinking that the dude is clearly not in his right mind on multiple levels, and we might need to call some extra help. Also, bro, I'm ugly as hell, so you must be crazy thinking otherwise. He did end up leaving pretty quickly after that, but I can't imagine what else he had planned doing if my manager hadn't been there. I guess her presence did end up scaring him off since he didn't return that night. Although scared for the rest of the shift, I tried to work through it, deciding that I simply came across a rare occasion and was thankful that I didn't have a stalker or something worse. I thought I was just unlucky that one time. After that incident, I put the mall security number in my contacts, not expecting to have to use it just in case. Well, next week comes by. I came back and started my shift early, and immediately while scanning the possible customers I spotted the same guy just a seat several yards away, eyes closed. He was facing the booth and it appeared as though he were waiting for something. He was stationary for 20 minutes before suddenly rising and patrolling the area. I ducked behind the boxes on the counter, and by some miracle the man didn't see me and exited the building. Thankfully I haven't seen him since. The idea that he regularly comes to the mall truly is sickening. The idea that he was likely coming back to that area as the same time he was there the first time, just to be a creep again, is even more disgusting. This happened about 5 years ago, after my fiancée and I had been living in our house for a little over a year. I'm 6 foot tall and about 225 pounds. I have always been naturally muscular, and am told I have an intimidating demeanor. My fiancée is 5'2", weighs maybe 130, and is a little tiny thing. Our house is a bi-level home where you walk in the front door and there are 2 half staircases going up the living room or down the basement. The only access to our backyard is through the sliding glass door in the upstairs living room and down the stairs from our deck. During this time I partied a lot, way more than I should have. I was between jobs and it was towards the end of the holidays, so my interest in finding a new job wasn't quite what it should have been. Many of these nights I was out partying. I would end up just crashing with friends, which meant my fiancé spent many nights alone with our 3 dogs. I had a serious problem with substance abuse, primarily alcohol, and I'm sad to say I was letting it get the better of me. Fast forward a few months, I had just found a new job that had random drug and alcohol test, a godsend in hindsight, and I had been sober for all of 2 days and had begun repairing my relationship with my fiancé when she told me how glad she was I was sleeping at home again. I thought nothing of it and kissed her on the head and told her I was too, and that I loved her. Later that night, my fiancé and I were watching TV downstairs when I thought I heard something moving in our backyard. The dogs heard it too, but I dismissed it because they just perked up their ears but didn't seem too alarmed. A moment later, I hear the noise again and my fiancé very quickly mutes the TV and gives me a very nervous look. "Did you hear that?" she asked, looking very uncomfortable. I told her it's probably just a few of the neighborhood cats playing in our bushes, as there are quite a few outdoor cats living in the area. But she shook her head and began insisting that these weren't the case. Before I could even ask her what made her so sure, I hear our sliding glass door upstairs fly open. All 3 of my Great Danes and myself are on our feet in an instant. The dogs let out the most ferocious sounding barks I've ever heard and tore ass up the stairs with me right behind them. As I'm rounding the first set of stairs and the dogs are reaching the top of the second set, I see the sliding glass door slam closed and the silhouette of a man running away. I get to the door and fling it open, and the dogs shove me out of the way to chase after the would-be intruder. I grab my flashlight, one of those big 4D cell mag lights that cops carry, and run out into the yard. I had just made it down the deck stairs when I see the dogs are freaking out at the back fence. I sprint over and jump the fence, just in time to see the man reach the opposite fence and try to get over it. He was covered head to toe in black clothing, a thin black hoodie, with the hood pulled tight to conceal his face, and jet black cargo pants. Without any regard for my personal safety, I charged at the man and barely missed getting a hold of him as he made his way over the fence. Once more I followed him, and come around the front of my neighbor's house just in time to see him hop into an old beat-up pickup and speed off. I watch for a moment as he tears out of the neighborhood and disappears into the night. I run back home as fast as I can and check on my fiancée and make sure she's okay. When I walked into the house, she was sitting in the upstairs living room surrounded by all 3 of our Great Danes and clutching the biggest knife we own. She was visibly shaken, but ultimately she is a very strong woman and told me she was ready in case I got into trouble. After calling the cops, giving statements and triple checking to make sure every door and window in the house was locked up tight, we decided to watch another movie, as neither of us were tired after the adrenaline rush we'd been through. During the movie I asked her what made us so sure before that it wasn't just cats playing in the yard. What she told me was enough for me to decide it was time to change my whole life. She said for about a month now she'd been hearing strange noises coming from all around the house late at night. She would hear footsteps outside and occasionally what sounded like whispering. When I asked her why she never told anyone, she just shook her head and said she didn't know. After hearing this, I came to the realization that whoever the man was, he knew that I was never home at night, and that my fiancé essentially was all alone most of the time. Fortunately for us, he somehow missed the fact that we have 3 Great Danes, and for whatever reason on this night he decided not to check and make sure she was alone again. Since that day I have been 100% sober from everything, 5 years total as of March 1st, and have not left my fiancée alone overnight since. Our relationship has never been stronger, and our 3 Great Danes are 3 of the best dogs anyone could ask for. In the end, this experience has changed my life completely, for the better. But creepy wannabe burglar, whatever you are, let's not meet. I was on a road trip with a buddy, and one stop we had to make was to visit his mother's grave. It was in Colorado in February, so the whole cemetery was covered in a few inches of snow. We talked to the caretaker, and she pointed us in the general direction. His mum's grave marker and those around hers were the metal plaque kid, flush with the ground, so no good references. We shoveled snow for a while, being as respectful as we could, and kept walking past this patch of snow that looked like it was made by some birds, after they'd rolled around in it. When we looked at the snow patch from the right angle, it looked like a human figure with a hand extending. We shrugged it off and followed the direction it was pointing. Not 5 minutes later, we found his mother's grave, right where the figure was pointing to. Last night I was in my kitchen alone, and just making myself something to eat around 3 a.m. or so, and I can feel something near or around me. While making myself a drink, I can see some sort of dark shadow quickly disappear around the wall, which has a little mirror cabinet in the corner, so I can see right around the wall, and of course there's nothing there. At this point I can feel something tug at my shirt collar, and the hair on my neck stands up on edge. So I quickly finish making what I had meant to and get back to my room ASAP. I know for a fact that I'm the only person awake, as my sisters are asleep and my brother is out. My mum's at work, and my dad is asleep in his room, so any noises I heard outside were definitely not them. I've read a lot of stories, and at the time thought it might be my mind playing tricks on me. But at this point I know that something is causing me to feel uneasy about the kitchen, or at least that part of the house alone. So after a few minutes I went to put my plate away and basically received confirmation that there is something here. I have a weird paranoia about stuff, so I always check to see if my balcony door is closed and locked, and there is no excess stuff plugged into outlets, that the fan light in the living room is off. The only time I leave it on is when I'm not going to sleep or during the day, and that the sink isn't on in any way, and that the stove dials are all off. I turn them slowly to make sure they are in the off position, then last I checked to see if all the bolts and locks on the main door are locked. Just before I went into my room with the plate, I did all 5 and went to eat. After I came out, I felt that same feeling again, and quickly washed my plate and glass, but then I saw what confirmed it all. In the living room we have this little cabinet with boxes in it. The time it was filled, and the time it was put there was the only time it's been moved. This has not been moved at all since we put it in that spot. But as I walked back to my room I turned around and saw that it was sitting about a foot forward from the wall. Now, had anyone moved it forward to grab something that might have fallen behind it, they would have had to have put it back right away because my mum would get angry. To be honest, now that I think about it, you can't really drop anything behind the cabinet to begin with, as the entire cabinet is squared off and everything would be contained inside. But as I'm moving back, I looked around to see if anyone was awake, but nope. I turned around to go through my 5 steps again, and the first thing I notice is that the balcony door is open slightly, with the latch. It's a little lever that when it's in the upward position, it will be unlocked, and then it swings downwards towards the side and points down, which is when it locks itself. It is in the halfway point directly 90 degrees pointing to the side. I've never seen anyone in the house doing this, as it would get in the way of opening the door itself due to the latch being in the way of the handle. This confirmed that something is there, but not an intruder. We are about 20 stories up, because I checked everything in the house and nothing, not even in the smallest places to hide. But something even more creepy happened the next morning. I had decided to go check the mail downstairs and got ready. As I stepped outside, the light right above my head started to flicker. I know, cheesy as hell, but I still got that uneasy feeling, so I knew it might not just be the bulb, which, by the way, wouldn't a bulb just go dimmer and then stop working rather than flicker? And my little attentiveness above me. I always look around and walk down the hall when I noticed that the stairwell door was fully shut. The apartment in front of mine and all the others along the hallway were also fully shut. I thought, now this is the perfect time to get a video of all of this. So I turned around and then started to record. There's no wind in the hallway, no doors that need to be closed, as it's on the other floors, and you can't hear what's going on the other floors either. These doors are pretty heavy, so no gust of wind or anything will slam them. It's 30 degrees C, humid, no wind at all unless you were outside. So after I got the mail, I started walking back down the hallway from the elevator, only to be met with the lights working perfectly. I had been gone for 3 minutes, or less, as I had a 3-minute song playing, and it barely finished by the time I came back up. No repairman is that good that he can figure out the light is out, get his ass up there with a ladder, take out the glass around the bulb, replace it, take the old bulb and ladder away, in the elevator which I was just in, within 3 minutes. This happened to my wife's friend. One day, she was driving home from work, in a quiet area, when an unmarked police car sped up behind her and began flashing his blues and signaling for her to pull over. To this day, she doesn't know why, but something wasn't right. And after a call to her boyfriend, he gave her a contact for our local police station. She rang the number and asked about an unmarked police car wanting to pull her over. The person on the phone did a quick check, or possibly contacted a dispatcher, and they were told to keep driving but stay calm. Within 4 minutes, 4 marked cars came speeding up behind, and before she knew what was happening, boxed the unmarked car in and forced it to stop. The dispatcher told her to drive around the corner and to stop. And as it turned out, the guy was being hunted by the police for pretending to be an officer to get young women to pull over when he has them at gunpoint to do all sorts of insidious things to them. I'm a 33-year-old female. As a 90s kid growing up in Eastern Europe, my childhood was full of stories, some of which cringeworthy, some hilarious, but still managed to give me chills. Especially now that I fully realized the potential harm I was facing back then. I had several instances where I got pretty close to being in real danger, but here I've picked only the 2 most prominent ones, because I don't want to bore you with a long post, and because they are imprinted in my mind, and weirdly very vivid in every detail. I was 10 years old. It was a hot summer day in noon. I was allowed to play in front of my apartment building with other kids, but I had to always stare where my mum could peek from the window and see me. On this day, maybe because it was noon and most of the other children were still having lunch or a nap, on the playground was just me and an 8-year-old boy, drawing with chalk on the ground. There weren't any people on the streets, but I remember noticing a man in his 20s walking past us. I didn't pay much attention to him at first, until I noticed that he started to stop and turned to look at us a few times, but then he went away, so I kept drawing. Some time passed, and I suddenly saw a pair of male shoes standing next to where I was crouched down, and when I looked up, I saw it was the same man. He looked around, and then asked the boy to go a little further away because he wanted to tell me a secret. The boy obliged, and I was left alone with this stranger. I remember he was staring at me. Even though he was smiling, there was some undercurrent tension in his whole demeanor, which made me feel a bit uneasy. He leaned down, propping his hands on his knees. I don't recall exactly what he said at first, because I was looking around to see if anyone I knew was around. But then he asked me if I liked kittens. My eyes lit up, and I immediately perked, saying yes. And then he said he knew where a mother cat with her litter of kittens was, and asked if I wanted to go see them. I immediately stood up, my uneasiness and all this stranger danger warnings immediately dissolving at the prospect of kittens, as my mum didn't allow pets at home. He told me to follow him and I did, him walking in front of me and me behind, until I saw that he was actually going towards one of the 4 entrances of the apartment building. Back then, the front doors of those buildings weren't locked, and neither were the entrances to the basement area, which were on the inside next to the main door. He entered the building and started to descend down the staircase leading to the basement area, and that's when some form of self-preservation instinct started to kick in and made me hesitate at the doorstep. He was already on the last step down to the basement when he turned to check if I was following, and beckoned me in a cheerful, "Come on, hurry up." I took a few more hesitant steps in, and he continued further into the basement corridor where it was dark, humid, and a putrid smell of mold lingered. I could see half of him. The rest of him was hidden behind the corner of the wall, but then I heard a metal click sound. I was starting to descend down the steps. I know, I cringe at my own stupidity when I remember it too. When he peeked again, half of him was still hidden from sight, but the visible half revealed his belt buckle dangling unbuckled, and then he came out a little more and his hand moved, drawing my eyes down when I saw it. Yeah, you guessed it. His pants were unzipped, and he looked at me and I still remember the expression in his eyes. I wanted to scream, but I was honestly so shocked. I had a deer in the headlights moment, and before he took a step up towards me, I finally felt the sudden adrenaline rush kicking in. One moment I was standing frozen, the next I was running out of there at the speed of light. I didn't even turn to see if he was following. All I knew was that I had to get away. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, to which there were 2 entrances from this one, just in time to bump into every worried mum who was putting her shoes on to get out to look for me. Worried sick because apparently the last time she peeked through the window, she didn't see me, and shouted my name a few times and got no answer. She had an unsettling feeling that something was wrong. She asked me what happened, and at first I didn't tell her because I was shamed and scared that she would get even angrier if she found out I was even talking to a stranger, let alone about to follow him. I started feeling anxious after that, and eventually admitted to what happened to my mum. Needless to say, I was given an earful of lectures, but wasn't allowed to play outside without supervision until years later. The second prominent story took place when I was 12. I'm thinking back now, compared to today's 12-year-olds being so outspoken and street smart, I was still a clueless kid. I remember I was feeling very insecure and self-conscious at the time, because puberty had hit as if overnight, and my previous scrawny little body was beginning to form curves, which also prompted unwanted attention from teenage boys, and even older men, at the age of my father, taking notice of me when I walked past them. It was during the spring vacation when my mum, my aunt, and my 13-year-old male cousin and I went to the amusement park in my city. My cousin was riding a bumper car, and I was sitting on a bench with my mum and aunt, when I spotted a man setting a big tin pot at the alley leading to the park. I immediately started pleading with my mum to give me money, because I knew what he was selling: boiled corn on the cob. Now keep in mind that back then nobody seemed to care about checking health and sanitary permissions of street vendors, and it was very common to see little ice cream stands and old ladies sitting on chairs with a pot next to them, selling boiled corn on the cob or cotton candy. My mum sent me to buy 4 of them, 1 for each of us, and I headed towards the man, my mouth already watering. When I approached him and ordered, however, I noticed that he hesitated and gave me a very unsettling once over from head to toe, and then without even opening the pot to check, declared there won't be enough corn in there. I thought that was weird, considering I had just spotted him coming, which logically was supposed to mean he had a pot full of corn, but didn't say anything because I was shy and awkward, and it had never even occurred to me to question an adult like that, especially a stranger. He quickly added that his car was parked at the nearby parking lot, which was right behind the alley leading to the amusement park, and told me that if I wanted it, I should follow him to retrieve another spare pot from his trunk. I looked back at the park and thought that the parking lot was still close enough and shouldn't be a problem. So relieved that I will, after all, get my corn, I followed him. He picked the pot and started carrying it towards the car, with me walking a few steps behind, and he was just opening the trunk to put the pot inside when two things happened spontaneously. My hand was abruptly grabbed by my aunt, who shook me and started questioning my sanity for walking away with a stranger, and shouting at the man for being crazy to suggest to a child to follow them to the car, and I caught a glimpse of the trunk, and inside was no other pot of corn, but the one he just put inside. Now at that point I was still confused, and frankly I'm ashamed to admit I was even a little annoyed at my aunt for overreacting, because I still wanted my corn and didn't understand what the big deal was until my train of thought was interrupted. What happened next still makes the hairs on my neck stand on end. Instead of clarifying the situation, given any semi-reasonable explanation or attempting to respond in any way, the man suddenly rushed to close the trunk, ran to his car, and then took off in such a hurry that the tires made those screeching noises from the rapid acceleration. My aunt and I stood there dumbfounded, and it suddenly dawned on us that what appeared to be an innocent yet cautionary situation was actually a very real potential taking attempt, because if there had ever been any reasonable doubt before as to why the man would lure a 12-year-old girl alone towards his car, his following reaction of fleeing the scene had left no room for it. My aunt visited us recently, and that instance was brought up somehow, so she said that she still remembers how what drew her attention at first was the fact that the man was unusually dressed up for a street vendor, and so she was watching closely with a weird gut feeling at first. When she saw that he was taking me towards the parking lot, she sprinted into action. Thank God my aunt, being a PE teacher and a mother of a very wild boy, was wearing sneakers and was always prepared to jump into action. I am a waitress at a local Italian restaurant that also does deliveries and pickups. One day, I would say a year ago, a man came into my place to carry an order. A girl I work with noticed him walking up to the door and asked me if I could take care of him. I said yes, not really thinking anything of it, and she walked back into the kitchen. He came in, and I could see why she had asked me to serve him. He immediately gave me the creeps. He was an older man, short and stout, wearing a big coat and a winter hat. He reeked like someone who had smoked an entire pack of cigarettes while walking through piles of cow poo. Thinking of it now in my apartment all alone, I can still smell him. What really scared me was the way he stared into my face, chin turned down towards his chest, looking up at me through his eyebrows. The stare made me feel like he was thinking of every possible way to torture me. He didn't say much, just sort of growled his order of me. He paid and waited behind the counter for his pizza to take home. He would pace with his hands locked behind his back, while never shaking that stare. Even when he would turn to pace the other way, he never shook his glance away from me even for a second. Being that I'm working behind this counter, I can't really go anywhere in case someone calls or comes to get their order. So I just stood there, waiting for the clock for his order to be done so he could leave. Once he was gone, I asked my co-worker if she knew anything about him and why she wanted me to take care of him. She told me that he gives her the creeps and that he was a registered offender, but never went into the details of his charges. And honestly, I didn't even want to know. I still thought about him for the rest of the day and looked twice before getting into my car at the end of the night. But sure enough, I soon forgot about him. Unfortunately, it didn't last. He began to go in very frequently. At first, maybe once every other week, then every day. Every time he would order the same thing, and began his pacing with that burning stare. Every chance I would run to the kitchen or get away from the counter, I would. My co-worker would make jokes about how much he liked me, saying he has never stared that hard at any other worker in that way before. These jokes didn't make me feel better, to say the least. The jokes halted when we noticed his pattern. We noticed that he only comes in when I would be working. We started to suspect that he recognized my car. I never had the same schedule, but I always parked in the same spot in our very open parking lot, so you'd always be able to tell who was there if you knew their cars. The shifts that I would work were a little strange as well. There was a very, very dead time at the day where we would cut half the staff, giving us a break for a few hours long. He began to come in sometimes twice a day I was working. He would come in while I would work in my morning shift and then come again from my evening shift. Or maybe it was just a crazy coincidence. Nevertheless, it freaked me the hell out. One night after working a double shift on a Saturday, I had walked out to my old car which I never locked. 3 out of the 4 doors on my car were broken in some way, so it's easiest to just keep them unlocked at all times. And I could admit that car was a piece of crap. No one would have dared steal it, so I never worried about it. Until this particular night I got into my car and immediately noticed the stench. My car reeked exactly like the man. That same smell of non-menthol cigarettes and cow poo was around me. I had completely convinced the man had been in my car that day. Since then I had someone escort me to my car every night, and I haven't seen that man in the last year. I hope you take your business elsewhere, creep. Let's never meet again. I was at a mate's house spending the night when I was in middle school. As expected, we'd stay up all hours, which didn't matter most of the time, except the bathroom was right near his parents' room. About the only time we'd get in trouble was when someone would wake them up when nature called. To avoid this, we'd go out the basement door and just pee in the woods. The door stayed unlocked most of the time because we'd managed to lock ourselves out more than once. This was also compounded by the fact that we all wandered out to find something to do in the woods on a regular basis. This night his older brother was home and kept barging in the basement door and raining chaos from above, so we decided to lock the door to deter him. Not that it would really have kept him out, but at least he'd have to use the key, and in doing so it would take the fun out of barging in. About midnight we hear the handle jiggling, and I didn't think too much of it, figuring it was his brother. After about 5 minutes of on and off handle fondling, we finally hit the door and yell for him to stop, and are met with quiet. There's no response. No more clattering of the handle, and that's great, so we can move on, right? Well, about 10 minutes later it started again, and the process repeated. This went on for about 2 hours until finally, after telling him to stop, we just said screw it and ignored it. He continued for about half hour after our last attempt for him to stop, and then just gave up. Well, fast forward to about 9 AM, we were just stirring and one of my mates had to go to the bathroom. If you've ever had a sleepover like that, there are bodies strewn wherever there's a space, and once the first person starts walking around, it kind of stirs the nest. We all started stretching and making our way to relieve ourselves of the soda that we'd been binging on the night before, and as I walk out, I grabbed the door handle to close it behind me, and noticed it felt rough. After looking at it, I saw the space around the keyhole was all but destroyed. There were giant scratch marks on every surface, and the metal guides were bent and skewed. I asked my friend that lived there what happened, and he said it was the first time he'd noticed it. Not really wanting to get blamed for something his brother did, we went upstairs and told his parents about the night before. After his dad went down to see what we were talking about, he went completely white and ran upstairs to call the cops. Evidently someone had been trying to force the lock open while we were all inside. That actually happened to me more than once on different occasions. What completely freaked me out about this time was the person knew we were there, and we knew someone was trying to get in. So he repeatedly tried to force his way inside. God knows what sort of person that was, or what they had in mind for us. This happened about 3 years ago, right at the height of Pokemon Go's popularity. I played it regularly with my fiancé Luke. We decided to get clever, and instead of walking to make our eggs grow or whatever, I would just drive around the residential streets slowly at 15 miles an hour. We always drove the same path and did this several times. At the time, we lived in a very small, one traffic light town. The town was primarily low-income families, and we usually played Pokemon at about 10 to 11 p.m., as did several other locals. Without other entertainment, it was a fairly popular game around town. This night in particular, I'm driving at the normal path with Luke. We're catching sick Pokemon left and right and hatching eggs like crazy. We pause in the water department's parking lot to catch our 217th Ekans and drive for 10 more minutes and park next to an empty lot. Across the street is a normal residential landscape with houses and whatnot. I'm catching my first Pikachu and am stoked as hell when some guy drives by in a beat-up SUV, slows down and asks me if I'm okay. I smiled and flashed my phone screen and told him we were playing Pokemon. When he said something like, "Okay, have a good one," but he seemed weird. So we leave and make our last stop around the neighborhood, pausing as we get to various Pokemon. And after about 15 minutes later, we're back in the empty parking lot, because there's a few more to catch. Suddenly, the house across the street starts pointing beams of light at me, very small, which is strange, so Luke and I noped out of there. As soon as we did, the beat-up SUV is behind me again. I didn't even see where he came from, and I turn onto the main road to head home, and I didn't even realize anything was wrong at first. He pulls up next to me and I can only see a male driving and a female passenger. The driver is shining a blinding light at me through the window as we drive. At this point, I'm simply pissed. I keep asking Luke why this guy has a problem, and I'm telling him to tell the guy to get lost, all the while getting ever more scared. I'm a fairly confident person, but not a confident driver, and I'd no idea who these people were or why they were doing this to us. But I do know that it's not the same guy that asked if we were okay earlier. I don't want to drive home because I don't want to lead them to my house, but I had no idea what to do, and decided to drive to the police station, but there was no one there. The parking lot was empty and the lights were off. We have 2 police officers, so they both must have been out on patrol. I was shook. I was raised in a large city, so tiny town living and no police at a station was a very foreign concept to me. I had no clue what to do, so I drove to the little hospital and managed to lose them. My fiancé and I immediately changed seats without speaking, and we sat there for 15 seconds and then pulled out. He's behind us again, and he's aggressive, so I called 911 at this point and began crying to dispatch, telling them there's a crazy guy following us. At this point, Luke is flying through the town at random, running red lights, speeding at 70 plus in residential areas, tearing through people's lawns, and this was seriously as insane as it sounds. Everywhere he went, the follower went too. Every time we sped up, so would he. We had no idea what he wanted, but we knew he wanted to hurt us. We could just feel it. At one point, we're tearing through yards in my car, and the guy manages to box us in. I'm still on the phone with 911, and we're stuck between his car and a couple of trees. Immediately upon stopping, the guy jumps out, as does the female passenger and 2 very large male passengers in the back seat. Luke immediately pulls out his gun, points at them and screams, "Get back, now!" They all bolt into their vehicle and take off. I am absolutely shaking and sobbing at this point, talking to 911, and the lady finally asks me where I want the cops to meet me. I tell her the local gas station. We're there within 20 seconds, as were the cops. This town is seriously so small. I don't know how the cops didn't see us or intervene while we destroyed dozens of yards at midnight and drove extremely fast and recklessly. Seconds after we pull in, so does the SUV, and the guy jumps out and begins to rush my car, but the cops stop him. They talk to him for a while, and we're just sitting in our car shaking. The older cop finally walks over to us and says, "So did one of you pull a gun on him tonight?" We were shocked. That was the only thing he asked us. We told him yes and explained everything. The cops went to speak to him again, came back, and basically said the guys thought we were casing his home because he kept seeing our vehicle pass it. The cops told us we were lucky he decided not to press charges because Luke pulled his gun. My car had decent damage from driving through trees and bushes and stuff, scratched up. Pretty sure the guy wanted to beat our asses. And the cops tell us that we're lucky. We're so shaken and scared. We didn't argue anything and left when they allowed us to. But not before they ran all our info and made us feel like criminals, like we were childish and stupid for playing Pokemon. The cops openly laughed at us. We went home and stayed up literally all night long, taking turns peeking out our window as we were convinced they were going to drive around, find my car and harass us. The next day we had high-tech security installed. I've since seen the guy and the girl several times. I worked at the school and they had young children. I'd never seen or interacted with them prior to this day or after, but I also know who they were, so I'm glad I don't live there anymore. I also never played Pokemon Go after that night. I should also mention that I understand why the guy thought what he did, but I don't think his reaction was remotely justifiable. In the summer of 2015, my husband and I were house sitting for these rich people in between our big move to the mainland, as we're from Hawaii, and some really crazy creepy stuff started happening just a few days in. The first weird thing that happened was when we got there I couldn't find how to get the motion sensor light in the entry garage hallway to turn off. We thought nothing of it. A few days later I was watching TV, and you can see the front door from the living room, and I saw a shadowy man walk by the front door. I wasn't particularly freaked out, because unfortunately shadow people are frequent visitors of mine. I think it must have been a Hawaii thing because everyone has seen them there. I think it must have been that same evening that I hadn't seen my husband for several minutes. So I called out to him and saw that front motion detector light flip on again right at that moment. So I walked out to it and heard him go, "What?" from the backyard, not the front yard. I quickly walked to the backyard through the house, and staring back towards the front yard I saw an orb zoom out the house and into the yard. A side note on orbs, I've watched those paranormal shows on Discovery Channel but never thought they were real until I actually saw them. Anyway, fast forward a few days, a different motion detecting light started going crazy one night, flipping on and off in varying intervals. At this point my husband, who you might call the rational one, is totally freaked out. I, however, felt extremely curious and wanted to investigate, which is so weird for me because I'm a total scaredy cat. I even make my husband walk me to the bathroom in the middle of the night because I'm too scared to go by myself. But I just felt compelled to go towards the garage upstairs area, and there's an apartment above the garage, and figure out what's going on. We got a flashlight and shined it into the garage and apartment windows, and we couldn't help feeling this very, very weird dread and fear emanating from it. Even though I was curious, I also felt it in the pit of my stomach, like some overwhelming depression or evil. We called it quits, I locked the doors, and we went to bed after that. There were several other things that we encountered while we were staying there. One evening I heard someone say, "Ding dong," kind of like how someone would say when they get to a friend's house to inform them of their presence, after which the dogs, as we were also dog-sitting, went nuts barking at the front door, although there was no one there. One night when we were walking into the bedroom, something brushed up against my arm, and when I turned I saw a person walking the other way down the hallway, turning a corner. Myself and one of the dogs saw an orb fly out of a room we were in. The dog definitely saw it too, and he looked freaked out. One morning while showering I dropped my razor on the ground, and when I bent down to pick it up, it was on the countertop across the bathroom. One morning my husband dropped his toothbrush and he couldn't find it for an hour, and then it reappeared on the countertop. I've had a lot of ghostly paranormal encounters in my life, but this last summer just puts it over the top. At one point I was in tears asking my husband why I'm so perceptive and why these things keep happening to me. I'm not one to ever pass up an opportunity for a good deal on some high-grade cannabis, So when I received a text from a friend of mine telling me that he could sell me a quarter of an ounce of some good stuff for $25, I jumped at the chance. He led me on all day, telling me that he would be dropping it off in the evening. Evening came, and so did the text saying he'd drop by later that night. And finally at 11:30, I received a text, sent with a ping of anxiety running through me. "Sup man, I'm headed out of town for the night. Your sack is in the garage under the ladder." I knew exactly what this entailed. I was to walk the 5 blocks to his old residence, a mutual friend's home where he lived in a loft in the garage. Slip in unnoticed by the neighbors, search until I found it, leave the money and be on my merry way. Simple, right? Wrong. The walk started off sketchy enough, with the lone street light on the block going out as I left, plunging me into this unusual pseudo-darkness. I walked along in silence, the only sound coming from the highway some distance away. I'd walked this way before, even at this hour, but I couldn't shake the anticipation in my gut. I reached the house, which I must say is absolutely terrifying at night. Something didn't seem right. My friend is very strict with his bedtimes. This meant that the house was dark at exactly 10 p.m. every night. Tonight, though, there was a glow coming from the first door. This could have been a number of things. Maybe he had other friends over, brought a girl home, or getting a late-night snack. I quickly assured myself as I stepped through the door into a pitch-black garage. I closed the door behind me and got to searching. The garage is separated into an upstairs and downstairs to save space. Upstairs there is a washer and dryer, while downstairs was a box storage that led under the stairs, forming a cave-like lair. I'm not gonna lie, I felt like a robbery simulator, rummaging through my friend's garage unannounced, looking for drugs. My heart began to race at the thought. It really started racing though, when I heard the heavy footsteps stomping their way towards the inside garage. I had kicked a paint can by accident, and they probably heard it. Now my first instinct told me that I should make myself known. It was my friend's place after all. He probably even knew about the whole deal. We laugh. He'd point where it was, and I'd be on my merry way. That's when I realized something. My friend does not own a single pair of boots. In a split instant, I had ducked down under the floorboards behind some boxes. The door outside was quite far away, the footsteps quickly approaching, so escape was not an option. I had to hide. I was so confused. It felt like I was in a slasher movie, hand over my mouth to keep from hyperventilating and everything. I listened as the door slammed open, the footsteps creaking slowly along the floorboards just inches to my right. They paced around the garage for what seemed like ages, grunting and taking heavy, labored breaths. They stopped at the top of the stairs, never making their way down though. Soon enough, they made their way back to the house, slamming on the door behind them. As soon as the door clicked, I bolted. I didn't stop running until I was back home, tucked away in my bed, every single light in the house on for the rest of the night. I wasn't about to get the cops involved with the situation, lest they go searching and get my friend in trouble. So I simply sent him a text message and went to sleep. I awoke to 2 texts in the morning. The first was a message from my dealer friend asking if I was alright. The second was a text from the friend who owned the house, telling me he got stuck at a friend's house overnight. I was so confused. Later that day, the friend with the house sent me a news link over Facebook with no caption. It was a news report about a burglary/murder that took place on my friend's street. 2 houses had already been confirmed as being broken into in the middle of the night. The first was the home of an injured veteran. He was found in his bedroom with a 9mm slug lodged in his head. All the valuables in his house gone. The second was my friend's house. I am a waitress at a local Italian restaurant that also does deliveries and pickups. One day, I would say a year ago, a man came into my place to carry an order. A girl I work with noticed him walking up to the door and asked me if I could take care of him. I said yes, not really thinking anything of it, and she walked back into the kitchen. He came in, and I could see why she had asked me to serve him. He immediately gave me the creeps. He was an older man, short and stout, wearing a big coat and a winter hat. He reeked like someone who had smoked an entire pack of cigarettes while walking through piles of cow poo. Thinking of it now in my apartment all alone, I can still smell him. What really scared me was the way he stared into my face, chin turned down towards his chest, looking up at me through his eyebrows. The stare made me feel like he was thinking of every possible way to torture me. He didn't say much, just sort of growled his order of me. He paid and waited behind the counter for his pizza to take home. He would pace with his hands locked behind his back, while never shaking that stare. Even when he would turn to pace the other way, he never shook his glance away from me even for a second. Being that I'm working behind this counter, I can't really go anywhere in case someone calls or comes to get their order. So I just stood there, waiting for the clock for his order to be done so he could leave. Once he was gone, I asked my co-worker if she knew anything about him, and why she wanted me to take care of him. She told me that he gives her the creeps, and that he was a registered offender, but never went into the details of his charges. And honestly, I didn't even want to know. I still thought about him for the rest of the day and looked twice before getting into my car at the end of the night. But sure enough, I soon forgot about him. Unfortunately, it didn't last. He began to go in very frequently. At first, maybe once every other week, then every day. Every time he would order the same thing, and began his pacing with that burning stare. Every chance I would run to the kitchen or get away from the counter, I would. My co-worker would make jokes about how much he liked me, saying he has never stared that hard at any other worker in that way before. These jokes didn't make me feel better, to say the least. The jokes halted when we noticed his pattern. We noticed that he only comes in when I would be working. We started to suspect that he recognized my car. I never had the same schedule, but I always parked in the same spot in our very open parking lot, so you'd always be able to tell who was there if you knew their cars. The shifts that I would work were a little strange as well. There was a very, very dead time at the day where we would cut half the staff, giving us a break for a few hours long. He began to come in sometimes twice a day I was working. He would come in while I would work in my morning shift and then come again from my evening shift. Or maybe it was just a crazy coincidence. Nevertheless, it freaked me the hell out. One night after working a double shift on a Saturday, I had walked out to my old car which I never locked. 3 out of the 4 doors on my car were broken in some way, so it's easiest to just keep them unlocked at all times. And I could admit, that car was a piece of crap. No one would have dared steal it, so I never worried about it. Until this particular night, I got into my car and immediately noticed the stench. My car reeked exactly like the man. That same smell of non-menthol cigarettes and cow poo was around me. I had completely convinced the man had been in my car that day. Since then, I had someone escort me to my car every night, and I haven't seen that man in the last year. I hope you take your business elsewhere, creep. Let's never meet again. I am a French student doing a master's in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. I live alone in an apartment in a building where there are only students. I'm 22 and enjoy a peaceful life. I live in a relatively calm and good neighborhood, and the only noises I've ever heard are the trams or parties in buildings, since there are plenty of students here. One night around 10, I hear a knock on my door. I live on the 3rd floor, and to get to my front door, you have to open the main door, which needs a key. Then you need to open the door to my corridor with the same key. So people who want to come into the door must have a key. Call me or ring me at the door so that I can open it for them, and then let them into my apartment. Nothing of this happened. I just hear a knock on my door one day. I usually open the door without a second thought, whether it's my landlord or a neighbor asking for something. As I told you, I feel pretty safe in the building, and I could also take care and defend myself in case anything happened, but this time for some reason, I had a bad feeling. I didn't move at first. I thought the person would just leave. I'd finished my assignment. However, the knocking continued. I didn't move at first. I thought the person would just leave and I'd finish my assignments. However, the knocking persisted for 30 seconds, so I yell out, "Yeah?" in English, and the person knocking didn't say a word. I say in English again, "Who is it?" The voice answers in English, "It's Uber Eats," which is weird because Dutch, always speaking Dutch, and I recognize the voices and accents of everyone on my floor who have access to this floor. So it wasn't a neighbor, it wasn't my landlord, it was someone coming from Uber Eats apparently. But the issue is I didn't order Uber Eats that day. The voice was unfamiliar in case it was a prank or neighbor pulling a joke. It was also a deep voice, at least 40, and definitely a smoker. "I didn't order anything. You must have the wrong address." A few seconds later, the knocking continues, and the same voice says, "I'm pretty sure you did. I have an order under your name." I start panicking. I look around and pick up a knife in case he breaks the door because the knocking was getting louder and fiercer. I check if the door is locked, and it wasn't. I was literally 10 centimeters away from him, and my front door was the only thing keeping me from him. I'm glad it didn't open from the outside, as you need a key to open it, even if it's not locked. I step back and ask again, "What's the name?" He seemed to be thinking for a few seconds. Then a final knock occurs. It was loud, and it translated some of the anger and frustration. Finally, I hear him descend the emergency stairs next to my apartment. The steps were heavy-footed, and clearly the person was in a hurry. I don't know what he wanted or what he would have done to me if I'd have opened the door. I still don't understand how he got through the original 2 doors, and why did he specifically come to the last apartment on the 3rd floor? Did he try others before? I posted about it on the WhatsApp group we have in the building, and no one saw anything suspicious. No one opened the door for anyone. Anyway, I'm lucky for my instinct telling me not to open the door, and I'm glad that I listened. As of today, I'm a 28-year-old female, but growing up I was a very sensitive little boy. My parents adopted me as a baby, and I never met my birth family until 2012. It was then I learned that every woman in my birth family were all quite sensitive to the paranormal. Nobody in my adoptive family had any sort of sensitivity, but they all did things subconsciously. When I was 9, my family moved to a very nice house in St. Helena, Napa, overlooking the valley. It was a beautiful 2-story house, but in a weird way since it was on a hill. From the road, the 2nd story was the first, but from the backyard down the mountain, both floors were visible. I believed it was called a sloped lot. Upstairs were the garage, linked to the main house by a breezeway leading to the laundry room. To the right was the study, and straight ahead was a living room and a kitchen. A hallway ran parallel to the kitchen, meeting at a family/dining room, where the front door sat, though none of us actually used it. Right next to that were the stairs, oh the dreaded stairs, leading down to one long hallway connecting the bedrooms. The experiences began happening immediately after we moved in. Part of me believes it was drawn to the negative trauma I suffered at the hands of my abusive father, who focused his rage mostly on me. And that's why I was targeted out of my brothers. But that's just a theory. The first of my many experiences was when the whole family was at my middle school for a scholastic book fair. I remember having a sudden twisting in my gut when my parents got a call that our backyard was on fire. To this day, nobody knows how it happened. It just started. Then the real fun began. It started out slowly, and only ever happened downstairs. My brothers and I would wake up and see a man walking back and forth on the patio, glancing through the French doors of our bedrooms as he passed. We never felt malice from him, and we all recalled seeing him. What makes that particular bit interesting is that from a child's perspective, usually the male entity would be malicious, while the female entity could be a protector. In my house, it was the polar opposite. Myself and my brothers felt a dark presence lurking downstairs in the hallway that would affect all three of us, to the point where we would take the stairs 2 or 3 at a time as fast as possible. I would have a recurring nightmare about struggling to get to the top of the stairs when something caught behind me. In one particular dream, I was reaching for the top stair, and the entity caught me and strapped my mouth shut so I couldn't scream. Keep in mind, I was too young for these things to naturally come to me. In the beginning, the door to my bedroom would slam in the wee hours of the morning, so loudly it would wake my father. He insisted it was a draft, even though no one else's doors would do it, and again it slammed with a massive force. We had to put a 10-pound bookend in front of it. Not much later, the entity in the hall would probe our bedrooms to see who was the most sensitive. My older brother, who slept at the end of the hall, nearest the darkness, outgrew his empathetic sensitivity. And my younger brother eventually stopped as well. But I remained more sensitive than ever, and I knew it. And that's when I met her. When the entity first introduced itself, I felt like it was kind of a protector, like the man from the balcony. But I knew that it wasn't true. She would stand at the far end of the hallway and wait. Not that she was actually there. There was no one there. But it was more of a feeling of perpetual dread. It wasn't darkness or blackness, but more that it physically sucked the light in around it like a dark hole. She would come to me in dreams as various entities, but the man would always show up and protect me. Mind you, I neither knew her nor the man, and the fact that the house was built on an inactive volcano littered with limestone and obsidian probably boosted the energy or what have you. For about 7 years I would wake up promptly at 3 a.m. sweating bullets, hearing someone running back and forth in the hallway, panting as they passed my room, repeatedly until around 5 a.m. when it began to get light. The first face-to-face incident with this creature was when I woke up at scheduled at 3 a.m. like clockwork and heard the panting and pacing in the hallway. After about 20 minutes I got too scared to sit there and do nothing and reached to the dresser by my bed and turned on the light. The panting and pacing stopped, and I waited about 10 seconds of soul-crippling silence before it happened. Long, gnarly, shadowy fingers slowly gripped the doorframe one by one. I heard the wood of the frame creak slightly as the wispy fingers pulled into the bedroom. Before my brain could process what I was seeing, I heard her gasp, like an audible gasp. The fingers retreated in pain, and I sat in silence until the sun came up 2 hours later. That was the first time I realized I had a weapon against this thing. I still don't fully understand it, but she couldn't exist in light. While that alone brought tears to my eyes recalling it, there was one other experience that haunts me to this day. Plenty of years had gone by now, and I had turned 14. My father was a prominent doctor in the area, and he was planning on taking my mother to a fancy hospital gala the same night my little brother had a sleepover at a friend's house, and my older brother was out college shopping in some other county. It was the first time I had the house to myself at night. I begged them to reschedule or hired me a babysitter. They told me I was old enough to be a babysitter and that I needed to grow up. Everyone in my family, them included, experienced weird happenings, but they all preferred to turn a blind eye. So my pleas fell on deaf ears and I was left alone. I spent the first half of the evening upstairs where it was safe, occasionally glancing towards the staircase for any activity from the living room while the TV distracted me. About 10 or 11 p.m., I remember thinking that I was too old to be scared to be by myself, and I could sleep downstairs alone if I wanted to. I kept the lights on upstairs and slowly descended the staircase, feeling the darkness getting closer with every step. When I reached the last step, I leaped to the light switch and hit it, illuminating the hallway. shaking violently. I hurried to my bedroom. Through the eerie quiet, my footsteps on the carpet were the only sound to break the silence. I finally slunk into my bedroom and quickly turned on the dresser light, jumping into bed as I stared into the lights shining through the downstairs. Going over in my head that all the doors were locked, all the windows were closed, and that as long as these lights were on I was safe, the lassitude of Morpheus overcame me, and my mind began to wander into the fields of Nod. Unlike the usual times I woke up at night, this time was slightly different. I woke up suddenly completely alert, with the fight or flight response already kicking in. I was facing the wall, but was absolutely terrified. I felt like if I moved or even breathed too loudly, it would spell immediate death. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, but was most likely only a few minutes, before I mustered up the courage to roll over. When I did, my heart sunk. All the lights in the house were off, and a womanly shadow was standing in the doorway. And thought that maybe my mother had popped her head in, before I realized she was with my father at the gala all night, and they were staying in a hotel until morning. I just sat there frozen, locked in gaze with this creature who finally made it through the threshold of my doorframe and into my room, a feat she had yet to accomplish. I closed my eyes and repeated in my head that it isn't real. It isn't real. I was trying to control my breathing as I shake and shiver violently, and I decide to peek and see if she's still there. Surely she can't come in further. I open my eyes. It's standing right over me, at the edge of my bed looking down at me. Not with its eyes. It didn't have eyes. What it did have was a large, toothy grin amidst the wispy shadows of its body. I daredn't scream and even move, but hold the gaze as I heard a deep rumble emanating from the swirling torrent of darkness that was this creature. Having grown up terribly abused, I knew fear, but this was something else. I had never been this afraid before in my life. It was no longer creaks or shadows darting in the corner of your eye. It was face to face with me. Something else, something not of this world. And it wanted me. I knew in this moment, as if its mouth began to expand, that if I did nothing I would die. So I did the only thing I could think of in that moment. My body suddenly lurched upwards from the bed towards the entity, and I screamed at it. Not a scream of fear, but more like a war cry. Like it could try to kill me, but I wasn't planning on making it easy. My face almost went through it, as it lurched up before it recoiled and let out an unearthly wail. As it heard my cry, it left the room. Within moments, all the lights in the house were back on, and I just sat there shivering in shock until the dam broke and I began to cry. I just cradled my pillow and rocked back and forth on the bed, sobbing until the sun came up and my parents returned home. My family, devout Catholic doctors, were already skeptical of these things and didn't believe me, attempting to convince me it was a night terror or perhaps sleep paralysis. Only I could move. I could think. I wasn't stuck. And it actually happened. I know I didn't dream it because I stayed awake until the next day. I don't expect anyone to believe me. But this was just the kind of thing that happened in this house. I believe it was limited to that specific location because it didn't follow me to college or anywhere else beyond. I fear for those who moved in when my parents sold it, but it would be cool to get in touch with who lives there and ask if they've experienced similar things. And we did have trouble selling it. It was on the market for years. Anytime someone would come to view it, they would get creeped out and leave. Anyway, that's my story. I personally don't believe in demons or anything gaudy, but I'll respect you if you do. If you have any theories on what it could have been, feel free to comment. I used to deliver hot shop freights across the Great Plains/Minnesota area. One night around 2 a.m., I was hauling across North Dakota trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't really bother me because I'd been through it hundreds of times before. Anyone who's driven across North Dakota knows that it's incredibly flat, like really flat, and there also tends to be very straight and long roads. It's somewhat easy to see things on the road as far away, even at night. I noticed something long on the road, spanning my entire lane approximately half a mile in front of me. I slowed down a little and prepared to move into the opposite lane, thinking it was some retread off a blown tire. As I got closer, I noticed it was two people laying head to toe across the entire lane. I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoiding them, and came into a complete stop, but they didn't move an inch. I was about to back up and check up on them, when I remembered a story that an old grey-beard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas people will lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a car or truck to stop and see what's going on. At that point, the road liars, along with whoever else is hiding in the nearby bushes, will beat the crap out of the driver and steal the vehicle, leaving them stranded in the middle of nowhere. I decided not to back up, and when the two people in the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked towards the shoulder. I called the police and explained what happened, but we were so far away from civilization I doubt anything came of it. Thanks to that old greybeard, I got to keep my truck, my job, my teeth, and my life. I'll just start this off by saying that my dad is a character. All of my friends loved him growing up because he could entertain you just by talking to him. This attitude is what initially led me to question the legitimacy of this story for a long time. But now that I'm a bit older, I could tell this one cuts deep every time we make him tell it. Usually he talks in a very upbeat, active tone, but when my brothers and I first heard him tell this story, or talk about it in general, his tone completely changes. It's as if all the color just rushes from his face. It's obvious he doesn't enjoy talking about it. Okay, now to the story. He was about 18 at the time. From pictures he seemed like an athletic, approachable teen who was living in the Gary/Whitting area of northwest Indiana. Sometime late in the evening, my dad, who's been a smoker for roughly 50 years of his life, decides to hitchhike to his local convenience store. He has a knack for talking about places or events as if he were there, an odd thing to do considering the shop was only a couple of miles away from his house. Eventually a truck pulls to the side of the road. It was a baby blue pickup truck to be exact. Apparently there were two men in the truck, probably both in their 40s or so. Pretty normal looking to him. He said that the driver was a bit burly and sort of looked like Jackie Gleason. The truck was only a 3-seater, so the man in the passenger side had to move to the middle. No word spoken apart from the driver asking him where he was going. This didn't strike my father as odd, so he proceeded to sit in silence, not suspecting anything. Suddenly, out of nowhere, one of the guys randomly bursts into laughter. According to my father, this wasn't your ordinary laugh, but something much more diabolical. Sure enough, the driver looks at my father with what he claims was the devil's eyes, now chiming in with the laughter. As you could suspect, they start going a different route. My dad knew they weren't heading anywhere near the desired location. He was trying to play it cool, waiting for his chance. Luckily, a few minutes later, they finally hit a red light. The driver slowly crept his arm across the cab and starts caressing my dad's neck. I guess his fight or flight kicked in, and a surge of adrenaline came about. He unlocked the door and bolted out, not looking back. He said he hid near a local church and watched as they drove around for him. Some years later, my dad was watching the news when the mugshot of the man popped onto the screen. His heart sank. The man was undoubtedly the same one who had picked him up hitchhiking. That man was John Wayne Gacy. I'm a 19-year-old female from Maryland. I don't live in Baltimore City, but right outside of it, and have friends that live there and find myself in the city quite often. Now, if you know anything about Baltimore, you've probably already made the decision to never go there. I thought I was used to it. I thought. My friend and I were driving to pick up another friend from a neighborhood we've never been to. My friend was giving me directions from her GPS, but we ended up on the wrong street. The streets in this city are very narrow, cars parked on both sides of the street makes it worse, and if you're lucky, it's a one-way street. Well, this street wasn't a one-way. There's a cop car, stopped with hazards on, going the same way as me but on the left side of the road. I'll be honest and say that I'm not the best driver, so I felt uncomfortable trying to go around it. It's fine, I'll wait. Well, a car coming the other way decides to try and maneuver around us both. He can't get around me. By this point, there's another truck waiting behind me, so I can't back up. The guy trying to get around me tells me to back up, but I can't, so I tell him to back up. He refuses, so I just sit there and can't stand up. Out of nowhere, I see a guy rush at my car on what must have been PCP, with a homemade wooden sword and nunchucks, eyes bulging from his head, hitting my windshield, telling me to back up my car so the guy can go through. I can't back up, but wouldn't try to fight this guy even if I did have a weapon of my own. He's clearly killed before with no remorse, and all of his neighbors went inside so they weren't a witness to anything that this guy was about to do. Turns out he's a heroin dealer that was mad. So many cars were pulling up on his block and hurting his business. So the crazy crack fiend with the bamboo locking sword, let's never meet again, and I sure as hell won't be going back there. When I was about 11 years old, I lived in a one-bedroom apartment with my mother. We were very poor, and the bedroom had double sliding glass doors that led out the balcony. We lived on the 3rd floor for safety and the cheaper rent it offered. My mother often stayed in the living room late into the evening because she liked to watch TV before bed, and I preferred quiet. One night I was up on the top bunk. We had a bunk bed with a full-size mattress on the bottom and a twin on top, and my mum came into the room and called my name quietly. I'm a light sleeper, so woke up. She said, "There's someone on the back porch, don't move." She was standing just outside the doorway to the room, and had stopped entering when she saw the shadow of someone behind the blinds covering the glass door. The type of blinds that are flat when closed, but with the lights around the complex, you could see the shadows through them. I just remember being shocked that someone could get up onto a 3rd floor balcony. Then he started knocking really slowly. That's when I got scared. My mum went into the kitchen and dialed 911. I stayed as still as I could, hoping he would just go away. It couldn't have been more than 3 minutes, but the next time I opened my eyes, he was gone. When the police arrived about 3 minutes after, they looked all over the complex but could find no signs of him. When one of the officers went onto our balcony, there was no indication how he'd gotten up onto the 3rd floor, but there were 2 very evident palm prints where he'd leaned against the glass for who knows how long before my mum walked in. It never happened to us again. I hope it didn't happen to anyone else either. Today I was on my way home. I was about 1 mile from my apartment, cruising with my windows down, smoking a cigarette and listening to some Kendrick Lamar. I noticed to my right was a white car that had sped up to be next to me, but I didn't think too much of it. As I approached where I would usually turn left into my complex, I decided based on their behavior this wasn't the best idea. At this point, I still had not looked at the driver or looked over to acknowledge them. I continued past my usual turn and got to the next light, where again they pulled up next to me. I heard a girl's voice, so I assumed it was some girl, just talking amongst themselves, trying to keep up with me. After the light turned green, I started speeding up to a max of 80 to 85 down a residential road with only their car and my own. The car was neck to neck with me the entire time, not trying to race, not trying to overtake me or anything, but completely matching my speed. I think, okay, this is fun, because I'm going fast with a stranger. It's cool to experience it, But once again I became wary when we approached the next light, and I decided to turn left to basically circle back to my house, thinking they'd had their fun and I had obliged long enough, that she'd been next to me or following me for at least 10 miles at this point. They immediately switched 2 lanes over to get behind me. I turn left and speed up once again, and they once again match my speed exactly. I still have not looked at the driver at this point and want to get into the furthest left lane to be able to turn down the street towards my house, but she was directly next to me so I couldn't get over. We approached the lights and it's red. I slow to a stop and still don't look over. Pulling a drag from my cigarette and looking for a song to pick, I suddenly hear a girl's voice ask, "Where'd you get your glasses?" It's at this moment I decide to look over and see a single driver, a girl, most likely in her mid-20s, early 30s. The first thing I notice about her is a wide-eyed stare. If you've ever seen a psychotic break in a person or drug addict-induced psychosis, you'd be able to know what I'm talking about. I went to college for psychology, so that plays a little bit into my decision of making this as well. I also noticed that her back windows were completely tinted. It was a pretty nice car. That also means she has access to money. After I made those assessments, I responded, "Over there at the Vista station," or whatever it was, and she replies, "Oh," and is still staring at me. Then she asks, "Are you from here?" "No, I've been here for a while, but I'm not from Alaska." The next question she asked is really what put me into suspicious and alert mode. "Oh, so you have a lot of friends?" Actually, she made it more of a statement, not a question, still wide-eyed. At this point, I'm sort of like, all right. But then she asks, "So what do you do for fun?" Well, I mean, I go to concerts. But this question weirded me out too, because it's like, it's been a pandemic. What I do for fun now isn't the same. "Oh, okay," she replies and just stares at me. Then I wait for her to continue or something, and then I decide to ask, "How about you?" She replies, "Oh, I don't really do anything. I've never been to a concert." Right. At this point, the light finally turns green, and I think that's the end of it, to suddenly hear, "You're really sexy." Now here's the thing. I'm not one to take compliments well, so I awkwardly reply, "Thanks." And then she asks if we want to exchange numbers while we're driving, and she's still screaming, matching my speed. I hesitate for a moment, but for the sake of the experience in the story, I say sure. She says, "Okay," and I pull forward and she pulls behind me. I drove for about 2 miles before reaching the point, basically where she had started following me in the first place. I pull into another little neighborhood that has an office and a parking area in front. I purposefully park in a spot so that she can pull up next to me and tell me her number on my left side. She then pulls into a spot basically 2 spots away to the right of me. Weird, I thought. It's about 5:50 or 6, pretty dark out, and I roll down my passenger side window. She rolls down her window and is staring at me and goes, "What?" I didn't say anything. "So, do you want my number?" She stares at me, thinking, and then goes, "You just take my number." I pull out my phone and I look at her and say, "Go ahead." She stares at me and she says, "1 second," and then reaches around for a maximum of 4 seconds before she sticks her hand out the window with a piece of paper. "Come here," she says with the first smile she's had the whole time. "Why? What's up?" "Come here," she says, still smiling, waving the paper. At this moment, I notice one hand is out the window waving the paper, while the other appears to be reaching into the door compartment below the window. Looking at her, I say, "I don't know. Can I trust you?" "I mean, I don't see why not," she says with this look of total fake shock that I would say that. "I don't know. I don't know you at all." Now this might not sound like I'm overthinking things, but based on her facial reactions or lack thereof, I don't feel like she was hurt that I was weirded out, and that's a bit weird. At this moment I say, "Sorry, I watch too many YouTube videos because it's true. For the past 5 months I've been obsessed with interrogation videos and other criminal investigations," and she just says, "Okay, just give me your number." "Are you ready?" I say. She stares at me. I start listing it off, and she stares at me again. After I'm finished, her stare continues. Oh, and my name is Jack. Jack? She repeats. Yeah. She waves the paper again. You don't want it? No, just text me and I'll have your number. She stares at me. Okay. I then say goodnight, that I have to go, and she starts her car back up and basically pulls up behind me, stopping for no reason. I notice she's looking at my directions as I peek at my driver's side rearview mirror. I then start to reverse so she knows that I'm not sticking around and pulls out the way. I head home, park, and make sure no one followed me, and head up to my home. I don't know who or what was behind those tinted windows, and I don't know why she wanted me to come over there to get her number in 2020. Sketch. I don't know why she made the statement about me having a lot of friends. I mean, I can speculate, but either way, I think if I had made the wrong decision tonight, I could have ended up dead or somewhere I didn't want to be. My life hasn't always been the best. A rough childhood and a string of horrible abusive relationships made life that much harder, and I was feeling as though I had hit rock bottom. The fall before college, I landed a job to save up on money and keep my mind occupied. December 2018, my job had recently laid out the plans for a company merge and was in desperate need to hire more help to make sure things went smoothly, both with the upcoming merge and the holiday season. I was about 3 months into this job, and at the same time very comfortable with the position and duties. My co-workers were very friendly, and though we could be classified as a dysfunctional family, we made it work. My boss had just hired a few more people, a couple of cashiers and a shift supervisor to get trained as quickly as possible and throw into the mess. All the new people seemed nice enough, and though I'm naturally a social person, I'm not very trusting. A week goes by and I'm put on night shifts with the new lead, and my first thought of him was, the guy seems pretty easygoing and harmless. But I was wrong. He seemed to be having a hard time adjusting, and to make him feel better, I would help him learn the job as best I could. He seemed friendly overall, always willing to help you if you needed it, and the regulars liked him. Everything was going smooth until my gut told me something was up. I personally wouldn't like to talk about myself because it makes me feel selfish, so my co-workers' knowledge of my personal life is limited to what I'll be doing after the shift, and that I had a younger brother who came into the store often, so when this man started to mention things, I never told anyone at the job unless it was necessary, as I was uneasy. My first paranoid thought was that he had found my Instagram, which at the time was public. I don't have other social media, but figured it was just that. Weeks go by, uneventful aside from the man making comments about his sex life to me and describing his ideal woman. He tries to befriend my little brother, a minor, and asks him to hang out with him sometimes. This man is in his 30s. My brother told me he didn't like the guy the moment he met him because he gave off serious creeper vibes. Maybe it was the inappropriate jokes, advances, abuses of power, talking bad about me, talking about him, or him constantly asking other employees where I was, even if I wasn't scheduled. But I started to feel very scared around him. I had co-workers come to me the day after their shifts with him, uncomfortable because the whole night he'd been going on about me when he barely knew me. He'd watch security cameras and call me from the office just to try and talk to me about the job and personal life. I didn't have a vehicle at the time, so my current partner, who was a saving grace, would pick me up from work. He had found out about my boyfriend. He threatened to beat him up on multiple occasions, as well as throwing things in my office when my boyfriend would pick me up from work. One night in particular, my brother got out from his job at the same time we closed and decided to swing by and pick me up. The psycho got in his car and followed us home. I was so scared I didn't sleep all night. I was terrified to work with him and asked my boss to throw me on morning shift so that I wouldn't have to see him. Thankfully he did, and I only had to see this man for a few moments as I was leaving to go home. After the merge, everyone went their own ways, and I haven't seen him since. But he has tried to contact me via social media recently, asking how I am and where I'm living. Because of him, I'm always watching my back, especially in my hometown. I'm paranoid he'll find me. Back in the 70s/early 80s, my mother lived in Sydney, Australia. She was in her early 20s at the time, and like most youth in those days, attended a lot of discos. One night, Mum and her female friend had just stepped out of a disco and were about to head home. Mum's friend, however, was heavily intoxicated from all the drinking and could barely walk, so she planned to walk her friend home, then head to her own apartment. They'd hardly walked a few paces before a car pulled up beside them, with two young men inside in their late 20s. They wound their windows down and called to the women, offering them a ride. My mum declined and was about to continue walking, but her drunk friend told her she wanted to join the men, and my mum asked if she could accompany her. Now her friend was about to get into a car with two strange men, and considering how intoxicated she was, Mum developed a bad feeling letting her friend go alone inside the car with two total strangers. She reluctantly agreed. They both got in the car with the men. They told the men where they wanted to be let off, and away they went. As they drove, the men made friendly conversation, and nothing seemed overwhelmingly off for the moment. However, it wasn't long before the conversation started to turn flirtatious, and it soon became clear the men weren't driving them to the location they'd asked for. They had started to head out the city and into the rural suburbs. Mum's friend was so out of it that she was oblivious to this, busy, preoccupied with conversation. By this stage, all of the red flags were going off for my mum, and she wanted to desperately get out of there. Eventually, the men pulled up outside a forest reserve and ordered the women to get out. Now the men's voices were demanding and no longer friendly. Terrified, my mum, who wanted to sprint away, still couldn't bring herself to do so as her drunk friend was being led into the woods. Mum followed until the two men attempted to pin them against trees and make advances on them. Now my mum was full-on fight mode, and began scratching, punching and kicking at the two men who were also fighting back. Her friend, now aware of the horrific ordeal, was also trying to defend herself but was significantly more vulnerable due to her weakened state. Mum eventually managed to injure the man attacking her enough to move on to the other who was attacking her friend. She fought with all her might until they managed to break away, covered with scratches and bruises. The men didn't follow, but hurriedly got into the car and sped away. Mum and her friend ran up to the nearest house, hysterical and bleeding from all the scuffles. They asked the woman living there to call the cops, and she did so promptly, taking my mother and her friend in. Unfortunately, the cops never caught the man, but my mum became far more cautious and aware of her surroundings, and used this story to warn my sister and I. One night I decided I was going to take my mum's brand new car to go get my boyfriend. She was fine with me taking it because my car was blocked in. It was a nice summer night, so I was driving with the windows down. A little bit of background on how my boyfriend's section entrance is set up. When you pull in, there's an intersection right away. The road that you use to pull in on has a stop sign about 20 feet after you pull in. On the same road, just the other side, also has a stop sign for outgoing traffic. The road that crosses the ones you pull in on doesn't have any stop signs. My boyfriend's road is the first one, so when I pull in, I stop and have to make a left, and his house isn't far from it. It's basically A+ with north and south having stop signs, and east and west not. I pull in, stop at the stop sign, and there's a white Ford work van outside of the very first house to my left. I waited for him to go for about 2 minutes and he wasn't moving. I figure he was waiting for someone to come out the house, so I slowly go up to make the left turn. And I turn, past the van slowly, and because it was tight, I squeezed. When I'm passing at him, he yells, "Hey!" and that absolutely scared the crap out of me. So I quickly get to my boyfriend's house and have to parallel park because his driveway is taken up. Where I'm parked is across the street from his house, and once I'm parked, I immediately lock my doors and pull up my windows. I can see the van driver from the side mirror parked where he was. My boyfriend was outside working on his car, and I immediately call him because I was freaking out and didn't know if the guy was going to come around and try and take me or something. As the phone's ringing, I look in the mirror and see the brake lights go on. Then the guy starts reversing down the road at 50 miles an hour. This road has cars parked on both sides, and I watched him come up the street, and in my head I was like, don't hit my car, I can't get this car fixed. Thankfully he doesn't hit anyone, but he stops outside my car. By this time my boyfriend is right in front of my car and he goes up to the guy's window. This was the conversation. You okay? Need any help, mate? You lost? You need directions? Anywhere I can help you? He doesn't say a word. My boyfriend steps back. The guy was in park, but he was hitting the gas pretty hard, so the engine was roaring. Then it seemed like he tried to shift either into drive or reverse, but he ends up staying in park and revs the van 3 more times. He finally shifts in reverse and flies backwards, only to pull over and park on the side of the street I'm parked on. I told my boyfriend I don't know what in the hell was happening, and he said to run inside and tell his mum and sister to lock the doors. That's exactly what we did. He was on the phone with the cops as well as his sister. His mum called his brother and told him what was going on, as he lives less than a minute's drive away. This is what I witnessed when I was watching outside the window. The drunk guy gets out of his van but is still running, and the driver's door is left open. He walks around my boyfriend's truck, pulls on the handle like he's trying to get in, then walks around again, then pats the truck's driver's side fender like it's a good dog, then walks back to his van, tries to get in through the passenger side, but I think it was locked since the door wouldn't open. And my boyfriend's brother comes round and screams at him. He must have scared him because the guy ran into his van and drove off right away. We all went outside and asked my boyfriend what he thought was going on, and he told me that when he asked the guy if he needed help, the guy wasn't making coherent sentences and seemed to be extremely intoxicated. He also said he thought the guy was attempting to break into his truck. This whole thing lasted about 20 minutes, and for the final 10, my boyfriend was on the phone with the cops, telling them the guy was doing some weird stuff and that he was drunk, and the cops said that there were 3 guys on the way but never showed up. A few minutes later, there was this family walking their dog and asked if we saw the crazy guy. They said that they saw him hitting cars that were parked, and apparently he crashed into a pole but reversed like nothing happened. My boyfriend later told me that the guy was speeding through his section at 90 miles an hour, and he went around it about 3 times. He had stopped outside of that one house, and that's when I pulled in and everything started. The guy never came back for the rest of the night at least. I looked on the local news sites and couldn't see anything about him, so I guess he got away with it. Weird, creepy drunk dude. I was still living at my dad's house when I was 17. It started the day we visited the house. I just got chills thinking about it. We were doing a house tour with the property seller from a company where my dad told me, "This is going to be your room." As soon as I entered, I knew I would never sleep there. I had that weird feeling like, no way am I going to sleep there. Finally, my dad bought the house. The first night I slept in that particular room, and I actually hadn't been able to sleep. I wasn't believing in ghosts, not sure if I still do, but there was something about this room I just wasn't able to explain, like a very strong bad feeling. I'm not someone who's ever been scared by this kind of stuff. The day after, I told my dad I would never sleep in that room again, and he saw I was dead serious. He knew I wasn't the kind of guy to care about this stuff, but actually, I did at the time. So he decided to build me a new room in this huge basement, like new walls and stuff. The room didn't even exist before we built it. A week or 2 went by, and then I started to hear voices in my imagination. It was just so strange. Then I started to hear an unmistakable knocking, softly on the walls, for no reason, and doors that I knew were closed would open when I went to the bathroom at night. I told my dad, and he started to make fun of me by opening doors and knocking on the basement door, saying it wasn't him. My best friend came over, and he felt something strange too, and didn't want to come back to sleep even after when he was drunk. He was telling me things like, "No way am I sleeping in that basement again." After a month or so, I started getting sleep paralysis on a weekly basis. Scared the hell out of me. Never saw anything more than my empty room though. Actually, I never saw anything. Always strange feelings and doors that had been opened, and creepy voices in my head. I was a serious hockey player with no drugs or mental problems. And one day I was at my girlfriend's house and was talking to her about it. Her mum heard some of what I was saying and came immediately. She was some kind of medium and stuff. She listened to me and told me she would come and see what was going on. It's after that discussion I started really getting scared because I was more convinced there was a physical reasoning behind it all. She came and I'll always remember the look she gave me. She immediately got out and told me there's one guy who's not happy and he carries a very heavy weight on his foot, and there's another guy who only wants to make jokes. I'll take care of that. She also told me some of the things that were happening in the house without me having told it to anyone. And from that moment on, nothing ever happened again. I asked her what she did, and she explained that she went to my bedroom, made them come to her, and then took them away from the house. I know it's weird, but the fact that nothing ever happened again creeps me out too. I'd like to add to the fact that I did some research afterwards. There was only one owner before my dad, and he confirmed that he built the house and nothing tragic ever happened there. I would also like to add that I'm French. So, you know, like from the moment she left the house and did her thing, nothing ever happened again. No sleep paralysis, no voice, no doors, no shaking, no knocking, no nothing. It still creeps me out just thinking about it. This happened a few months ago. It was a few days after Christmas, and my mum had asked me and my girlfriend to house sit and watch the dogs for her while she went on vacation for a week with her boyfriend. We agreed, and the first few days were pretty uneventful. My mum's house is on the edge of a rural upstate New York town, so really the only big thing that happens is road work. It was probably the third night there. My girlfriend and I were on the couch, she was on her phone and I was playing Pokemon Shield on Switch. It was probably around midnight when suddenly we hear footsteps from outside. Someone with really big and heavy boots had stepped up onto the porch. The way my mum's house is laid out is that there's a couch against the wall with windows on either side of it. On the other side of the wall is the front porch, so this guy was right behind us. He stomped around some and then got really close to the window on the left side of the couch and grunted, "Ugh! Hell!" in a deep angry voice and stomped off. My girlfriend and I froze, but after 5 seconds of registering what had just happened, we got up and turned off all the lights in the house and went to the laundry room where no one would see us. After a little while, I decided to go out a different room and look out the window to see if we could turn any of the lights back on. When I look out of it though, I see this big burly guy shuffling down the sidewalk opposite our house. In his hands are a plastic bag. Keep in mind this is midnight in a rural backwater town, so none of these stories around. Keep in mind it's midnight in a rural backwater town, so none of the stores around are open for him to get one. The guy continues doing this awkward shuffle while holding this bag, then suddenly starts moving nimbly in an almost cartoony manner across the street towards the parking lot near my house and vanishes. I go back to the laundry room where my girlfriend is and tell her what I saw. I bring her back to the window as I was looking out to see if we can find him again, but he's still gone. We check other windows around the house to see if he's out any of those. My girlfriend is looking out a window on the other side of the house when she says she sees him but he's walking away. We try to collect and discuss whether or not we should call the cops, when suddenly we hear knocks on the door on the other side of the house. We race to the door, and we can hear the doorknob jiggling. Thankfully it was locked. One of my mum's dogs starts barking and going insane. He's a small rescue dog that growls at anything foreign. He has a loud, ear-piercing bark, so I think that scared him away. We called my mum and asked her what to do. We debated calling the cops, but cops in our area are notorious for not really doing their job, so we decided against it. My mum also encouraged us not to because she thought it was just some drunk, and/or high person that didn't know what they were doing. While this wouldn't be the first time someone showed up drunk at the door in the middle of the night, gotta love small towns, right? I don't think he was. I don't know what the guy's intentions were, but I'm glad I didn't find out. It's about 6 o'clock on a Friday night, and I've just gotten off work at a bad part of town. I'm driving northbound on a 2-lane street when I reach the part where a freeway off-ramp merges into my lane. I'm driving in the left-hand lane when I see a black Mazda sitting at the stop sign waiting to merge. He starts to roll forwards, and before I've even passed him, and I'm thinking he doesn't see me because of the sun or whatever, I'm getting closer, and he's still rolling it down, so I give 2 short honks, nothing drawn out or excessive, to just politely beep him and let him know that I'm there, and that I'm not planning on spending my Friday night in a car wreck. He keeps rolling, not even slowing down, so I simply drift halfway into the lane to my right, and checking my mirrors beforehand, and go around the front of his car. I'm slightly annoyed, but no big deal. Let's just get home. I get maybe less than 100 feet down the road when I hear someone yell something like, "You think you're the police or something?" I look to my right, as my windows were rolled down because of a heat wave, and I see him along with me on his windows rolled down too. He's angry, Hispanic, and tattered up. He's wearing a wife beater, and he has a shaved head, so I'm thinking he's a gangbanger because gangs are rampant in this part of town. He continues to ask if I think I'm a cop, and I say I don't want an accident. I know it doesn't make sense, that's just what came out. We repeat our cop/accident line a few times, where he does something that scares me crapless. He takes his right hand off the steering wheel and reaches towards his waist, and I immediately think, this guy's packing heat. I don't know if he actually has a gun, because I can't see his hand, and I don't really want to find out either. I start pulling back because I'm not about to give him a clean shot. It's a good thing too, because he starts driving into my lane, but it's a slow enough drift that I'm not sure he's trying to run me off the road. Either way, I've pulled back far enough that he swerves into my lane and misses the front of my car. He swerves back into the right-hand lane and starts to slow down too. Since I started decelerating earlier, we're both slowing down, but I'm still putting a distance between our cars. The second, scared crapless moment occurs when he slows to a complete stop. I stop too because there's no way in hell I'm passing him. So he's there in the right-hand lane and I'm just sitting here in the left-hand lane, about 5 or 6 cars lengths behind him, and we're both just stopped in the middle of traffic. Cars are backed up behind me, and there's a stopped car to my right, and there's a concrete barrier between me and oncoming traffic. So this freaks me out because I feel completely boxed in. Nobody honks, nobody moves. We're all just waiting to see what this guy does. The adrenaline is pumping through me, and I see my options. 1, he gets out of his car, and I see a gun, and I'm ducking behind the dashboard, flooring it and running him down. 2, if he gets out of his car and I'm letting him get close, flooring it before he can get back to his car, and he better get out of the way or I'm running him down. 3, if he gets out of his car and just stands in the middle of the road like an idiot, I'll consider running him down just in case. Now, I'm not a violent person by nature, and I'm still shocked that I considered running down another human being as an acceptable option, but take in mind I was under a lot of pressure. So I'm sitting there in my car waiting for him to make his move. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably less than a minute before he starts moving again. He's driving well under the speed limit and I'm thinking he wants me to pass him, but I failed my first driving test for going too slow, and I can go slower than him. I'm probably driving at 20 in a 45 zone, and by the time we reach a traffic light he goes through, and I make sure I catch a red light. I pull into the next AM/PM because I'm still pretty rattled and grab a corn dog and wait for my hands to stop shaking before I head home. If we ever meet again, I better hope I'm behind the wheel. Otherwise, I'm out of options. The house I lived in was haunted. Best I give you some history. I was a kid when I first moved in, and lived there for over 15 years. I moved out for reasons unrelated to anything. My mum bought this house from the original owners who had built it. The original owners had one daughter who worked for a famous politician. She met an unfortunate end that people find shady. The parents moved somewhere else after losing their only child, and eventually had the house I lived in built. Not sure how long they lived there, but we bought it and they moved into a nursing home. Soon after I moved in, I would hear what sounded like a little girl saying, "Hey," exactly like someone just trying to get someone's attention. I would be in my bedroom, and it sounded like it was coming from the front door. I go to the front door and no one was ever there. This was also in the middle of the day. The only children I remember wouldn't have been babies, or not even been born yet when this happened. It happened repeatedly a few times a day, on and off. My family is Buddhist, and we got a family friend to set up some shrines to protect us. The haze stopped, and all was well for a while. We never stopped having those shrines, and they're still there despite more things eventually happening. My house is oddly long. Family room / basement door is on one side of the house, followed by the kitchen, living room, and then bedroom areas. Only my mum and I lived there for quite a time. One day I was home alone and heard the distinct sound of someone going up the stairs. The door to come up, opening and closing, and footsteps walking towards the bedroom. I was in my bedroom, which is the first one after that stretch of the house. I wasn't spooked, as I really did think it was my mum coming home in the afternoon, but no one was there at all. Years went by, and my then boyfriend, now fiancé, moved in for a bit. As a heads up, he's had paranormal stuff happen to him previously. He got the middle guest room. The following will be his experiences. One of my ugly dolls was in his room, on his bed. He wasn't a fan of it and put it on the floor one day. When he woke up next morning, it was back on the bed next to him. Neither my mum or I moved that doll. That long stretch from the bedroom to the other side of the house, he never liked it. Felt like he was being watched and not by anything good. I'd also like to add that I was always rushed through that hallway at night, with lights on if I had to. So we were never fans of that walk. It got better when we adopted 3 cats, who mainly stayed in the family room on the other side, like they formed a bridge between the 2 areas. One day he came home from work one morning, 3rd shift, and noticed the lights behind my mum's bedroom would turn on by themselves. They didn't have any motion or timer. My mum was at work. I have also seen a door that was open later be closed without anyone around, but I didn't witness the act itself. Another thing I heard a few times was the sound of a bouncing ball outside my house. This was years ago, so I can't recall what kind of ball it sounded like, but imagine a kid just bouncing a ball on concrete repeatedly nearby. But it was only in the middle of the night, and there is no hard surface near that corner of the house, just grass and dirt. The driveway is on the whole other side of the house. So the house now has 3 people. One day, due to work and travel, I was home alone. I was in my room and heard a very distinct knock on my closed door. From the rhythm to the volume, it sounded exactly like how my mum would playfully knock on my door to get my attention. 3 lightish knocks in quick succession. I remember being very, very scared about this because whatever it was imitating my mum. I did a lot of praying for protection that night. Finally, we arrive at the last incident. If you notice, everything I had experienced had either been something that changed but I didn't witness, or something audible. This was my first visual experience. This happened with my mum and dad in the house at night. My fiancé had moved out by then. My dad was in the kitchen cooking for the next day. My mum was in the guest room, and I was in my own room laying on the floor on my stomach on my laptop. My actual computer desk is so full of crap, I chose the floor. I was turned away from the entrance with the door to the right of my feet from my point of view. The door was closed, the lights were on, and in the reflection of my laptop monitor I saw someone pass from left to right, with the lights behind me and seeing from the display that's on, I can't say I saw any details, but the lights were interrupted by a figure walking past, like someone was going from the door to my room and passing the lights. The way the reflection looked seemed something out of the ordinary, and I thought it was my mum messing with me. I quickly turned around, but naturally no one was there in the room with me. The door was still shut, and no one could have opened the door, walked back and forth and left that quickly and quietly. I immediately checked on my mum in the room right next to me. I had to eliminate any doubt, even with the unnatural speed a human wouldn't had time to sneak out. She was on the bed with blankets, a lap desk, a laptop, and busy as a bee. No way my dad could have done anything like that. He's old and not quiet. So that was my second fearful incident. I'm not gonna lie, I did not feel comfortable sleeping in my room for quite a while after that. Just the culmination of all of this was getting freaky for me. We went to a Buddhist temple to get some stuff done. I was planning on moving out soon, and didn't want whatever this was following me. So far, so good. Despite my mum having her fair share of ghostly experiences in her home country, when she was a youngster, she never experienced anything in this house. My dad as well. We actually didn't want to tell him any of this as we didn't want to spook him. In summary, I feel like maybe the beginning may have had something to do with the daughter of the original homeowners, although she never lived here and definitely wasn't a little girl when she passed. It's like she was looking for where her parents lived last. I don't know. Maybe she regressed to a more innocent time of her life with her child's voice. As for the rest, I have no idea. I'm just happy that I'm not feeling that fear anymore. I'm gonna be honest. Men usually never hit on me or approach me at all. This is because I am a very large woman. It is weird when they do. It's only happened twice in the last 6 or 7 years. The first of those times was okay, a little uncomfortable since I was in an elevator with this complete stranger in my apartment building, and he kept asking me out for coffee. I know I'm not attractive, so I never believe people will act like I am. I'm also not looking to date. The second time, however, just happened recently. After work, I took the bus down to the grocery store. It's a few minutes in the opposite direction from my apartment, but they have some pretty good deals, so I like to go at least once per month. As I started walking away from the bulk foods area, this is the only store with sesame glazed cashews, so I was getting some, I heard someone say something like, "Hey." There were other people in the area, so I figured this person was trying to get the attention of a deli or baker employee nearby. I saw him out of the corner of my eye, but paid no attention and walked off to continue my shopping. I had used the phone in the store that automatically rings up the taxi company to call my ride before exiting, and walked off to the side where the benches are to wait for it to arrive. A few people walked behind the bench, as they also left. Then one stopped and said, "Hello." I still paid no attention. The only person I talked to besides customers at work is my sister, and she was back in our apartment. He came a little closer, cleared his throat and said, "Excuse me." I turned. It was the guy. It was then I realized he had been trying to get my attention inside the store earlier. "Oh, hello." I smiled. I really am anxious out in public, but I'm decent at faking friendliness. "Do you live round here?" "No, I'm just waiting for my ride home." "Ah, you know, I live over there." He pointed at the townhouse complex across the street. "I can give you a ride if you like." Well, that was fast and forward. "Oh, thanks, that's all right. I already called my ride and it's on its way." "Are you certain that they're coming? Because it's no problem to drive you." I assured him that my ride was on its way, and he kept trying over and over to get me to come with him despite my polite refusals. He offered to put his phone number in my phone so I could call him any time, day or night, and he would come pick me up. Well, that was creepy. I told him the truth and said I didn't have a cell phone. He immediately challenged that by asking how I called for a ride then, and I said there was a phone inside the store that I used. He chuckled and asked, "Are you worried if I give you a ride your husband would kill me?" Husband? Yeah, right. I'm 35 and have never even had a boyfriend. Oh, he might. He can sometimes get like that. Best if I just take the cab when it arrives, I lied. Well, you don't have to tell him that I gave you the ride. That wouldn't be very honest of me. Besides, the folks at the taxi company know who I am, so I can't just no-show. Which is true. I've been a regular for the past 6 years and they know me by voice now. He then asked where I was from, and I said that I was from this general area. He said that he was from Africa. I could tell that already. So I politely asked which country. He told me and then started talking about being from a tribe and how tribes would fight each other for things, mostly about how whichever tribe won, they could marry women from the other tribe and not have to pay for that privilege and whatnot. I was just praying that my cab would come soon. I kept turning to check. When it finally arrived, I stood up and said, "Looks like my ride's here." He said it was nice to talk to me, and as I was putting my bags in the car, I hopped in the cab, thanked the cabbie for finally saving me, and we were off. That guy must have offered me a ride at least a dozen times. But that wasn't the end of it. As I was getting my stuff out the cab once arriving to the complex, as there are multiple buildings and our parking lot sloped down a hill, and I am at the top of the hill, the man drove past me. He didn't live here too. He followed me. I don't know what he hoped to accomplish since the buildings are secured and he doesn't know my first name, let alone my last, which is the only building listed outside the buzzer. I hustle my fat butt into the building and hope I don't meet the guy again. This happened around 2016. Back then, me and my buddies were doing some traveling across Central and South America. While we were doing some long deserted highway, my friend and I start to get really thirsty and look on the GPS to see where the nearest town is. We were dying for a soda. It was really hot and our air conditioning left a lot to be desired. We see the nearest town is about 10 minutes away. As we're approaching, we can't see the road, but my friend points a little single dirt road offshooting from the highway, so we take it. It's very bumpy as we drive off, and we get to this tiny rundown town in the middle of nowhere. It has about 3 shops, I think, all next to each other. But the people look friendly and amicable, so I tell him that I'll be right back, to leave the aircon running to cool down the vehicle, and that I would get the drinks. I go in, get the drinks, and pay. I should probably mention at this point, I had just taken out a fat load of bills from the bank account in the last city. And when I open my wallet to pay, the cashier's eyes widen significantly. And by cashier, I mean someone with a piece of paper and a calculator. There was no cash register. I grab my drinks and make my way back to the car, but feel all eyes on me from the 4 people that were in the shop at the time. I jump back in, talk to my friend before peeling off and having a good long swig of Coke. We're back on the road, and after about 15 minutes, 5 cars pull up behind us, matching our speed. At this point we start freaking out. Who the hell are they and what do they want? For a moment I thought it was police, but check my mirrors and it clearly isn't. These cars looked run down as hell, and our car was relatively new, and I was convinced that if we got faster we could definitely outrun them. So I started putting my foot on the accelerator, pushing 80, pushing 90, pushing 100, and these guys were matching speed adamantly. I could hear their engines roar, and it was clear that if they went any faster I'm sure their engine would explode. But I carried on pursuing the speed. Just as I was hitting 110, do I see lights up ahead of me, and it's the police. I praise whatever higher power there is up there, slow down and stop right in front of them, and the cars in front of me just pile on, going quicker than before, and the police take no notice. I speak to the female officer, and ask her why she didn't stop those cars. And she said because I'd pulled over first. Gee, thanks. I explained the situation to her, and she wanted to know why I was speeding. I gave her a quizzical look and explained again that I was being chased by 5 goons in cars. She kind of bats the complaint away and asks what I did wrong. I give her a weird look. And then I think back to the shop, and it all adds up. The people there must have seen the wad of cash and definitely wanted to stop me to take a piece of it. After explaining it to her, she's quite satisfied with the answer I gave, and says to be careful around these parts, and that desperate people will do desperate things for money. I sort of thank her half-heartedly and make my way, but she warns me not to speed again. Nice. We leave, and we weren't bothered by those people again, thankfully, but it did scare the crap out of me. We then stocked up on drinks after that to not have to make any unprecedented pit stops in rural, nowhere towns. I used to work in a carousel at a shopping mall in France. It was the 3rd biggest in Europe, so rather large. The first time I worked there, as it was owned by my parents, I was 13, and not really used to Parisian life. I came from a small town in the south, so it was really weird for me to be here. But one day a guy, between 20 and 30, was sitting on a bench and looking at me. He seemed quite nice, and at first I thought he was a parent or something looking at his child. He was completely alone and only looking at me. I awkwardly smiled and said, "Hello," thinking he needed some help. He kept smiling, and that's when I started to get scared. But I kept doing my work, looking at another bench to make him understand that I was uncomfortable. 5 minutes later he moved, sitting on the bench that I was looking at. He wasn't really smiling, and looked kind of disappointed. So I started looking up, because people could look at the carousel from there. When I looked down again 10 minutes later, the guy was gone. I thought he left, but he was still looking at me from the first floor, with that horrible smile. He stood there for a whole hour, and continued changing so I would notice him. When I left work, he followed me, so I told my co-worker to accompany me until I got home. That was a real creep. He came back in on random days and did the same thing. But now it's been at least 6 months and I haven't seen him. Last year I also had a pause and decided to go to the nearest bookshop, and as I did, I found a book that I really wanted to get, a Tolkien book. There was a guy there who looked at me and made a Tolkien reference. I laughed and just left. 20 minutes later, the same guy was on a bench next to me at the carousel and looked at me and smiled. And he came to see me and asked for my number. I said I didn't give it out to strangers, but he kept insisting. Then I asked him his number and told him that I'd text him when I was done with work, but of course never did. He came back 2 days after, but I didn't see him. I noticed him following me when I was in the same bookshop. I was moving randomly to see if he was really following me. He was. So I walked towards him and asked why he kept doing this. He then said he was in love with me, that I reminded him of his ex-girlfriend and that he wanted to get to know me. I said I was in a relationship, and he said it was okay. He could be a third wheel, that I could just text him whenever I felt like it. Maybe a month after that, I was going to a big convention where I was cosplaying as a random maid. I was holding a free hugs cardboard with some random drawings on it, and with 2 friends, and we were having a ton of fun. When out of nowhere, someone jumps up and hugs me. It was this dude. We called security, and he kept screaming that I was the love of his life and that he would end his own life if he couldn't be with me. Apparently he asked my coworker why I wasn't there, and she thought he was a friend of mine and said that I was going to a convention. He came to search for me. I never saw him after that, and then I blocked his number. The final story happened in December of 2018. I had 2 jobs, but in the same mall. A guy of about 20 to 30 with long hair was sitting on a bench next to the carousel and kept on looking at me. He sat there all day. Who does that? And I noticed that he was sometimes raising his phone and moving it in my direction. almost as if he were taking pictures of me or filming me. I was 15. You're not supposed to take pictures of minors. Plus, the way he looked at me was very strange, and I even caught him licking his lips while looking at me. I felt really uncomfortable, but kept on working and said nothing. The next day, I was working my other job, which was another carousel, and was only here for the Christmas holidays. I didn't see him, but when I left my job and was waiting for my parents to get ready so that we could go home, the guy sat next to me really close and asked for my number. I said no, and he looked down, very disappointed, and asked if I was working tomorrow. I asked, "I don't know. Why'd you ask?" "'Cause I like your body." He then stood up and left. I really didn't want to go to work the next day, so I told my co-worker Lionel, another co-worker, about what happened. I could hardly sleep that night. Was really paranoid about everything around me. Then I saw the guy and told Lionel to ask him to stop following me like that. He came back with a huge smile, saying, and I'm not kidding by the way, "It's okay. You two will go on a date." Apparently the guy told my co-worker that he was a friend of mine and was messing with me. He said he was really shy in playing this game, so he would have this confidence to ask me on a date. I felt so strange, as if I was going to fall. I stopped working that afternoon and told my parents. They told me to stay with them and immediately tell me if I saw the guy again. As we were leaving, I swear, I saw the guy with a hoodie under the rain. The next day, I was with another co-worker and saw the guy on the bench next to the carousel. When I told her, she ran towards him and yelled at him stuff that I couldn't hear, but I could see the guy's face and it was priceless. She returned with a big smile and the guy left me alone forever. Apparently she said that she knows where he lives, and if he saw him around, she will blow his brains out. Thankfully, I never saw the guy again. In any case, 3 creepers. Let's not meet. This is the first time I share anything like this, but I need to get it off my chest because it's been freaking me out for years, and I can't talk to any of my friends about it because they don't believe me. I have a long list of things that have happened to me over the years we've been in the house I currently live in, and I am a 20-year-old college student since the time of this post. The first event I can remember was when I was around 5 or 6. This is shortly after my brother passing away from cancer. I had a babysitter with me who knew me since just after I was able to walk. I don't remember her much after this event, but she was extremely nice. Anyway, I walked into the entrance area in my house that has stairs going to the upstairs. This area is connected to the dining room, living room and kitchen. I saw a man walking down the stairs with what seemed like a Civil War attire. When he got to the landing and turned to go down the rest of the stairs, he looked me dead in the eyes and moved his mouth like he was talking, but I couldn't hear him. In response, I turned to call my babysitter Emma, and I turned back and he was gone. I don't know what to think of that besides an overactive imagination, but I don't think so. Shortly after this event, Emma quit because she got scared. I don't remember saying this, but according to my parents, I said something along the lines of, "He doesn't like you," and her, before she almost got into a crash a few days later. The second and third events all happened in a 2-year time period. I usually have to bring the Christmas decorations back to the basement in mid-January. It was a normal day and we just boxed all the Christmas tree ornaments, so I had to go and put them in the corner of the basement, where we have random stuff from when my parents first got married to where they first moved into the house after it got built. We put the box down, and as I'm still walking back to the stairs, I heard a faint girl's voice whisper something behind me. My hairs stood on end, and I book it up the stairs and start crying. They don't listen to me since I'm only 10 at the time, and a year comes and goes, and I've steeled myself for this moment, again, thinking I just heard the TV that's directly above me. But again I hear a girl's voice saying something, but this time it was in my ear. The fourth event happens in a very similar way a few years later, since I refused to go to the basement alone. I go down there because I needed to grab something out of the fridge for my dad, and I already didn't want to be down there. Just as I'm leaving, I hear a girl laugh, coming from the corner of the basement, where the other two events happened, and one of the pipes starts making a similar noise to a teapot boiling. This was the first and only time this ever happened in the house. The fifth event was from when I was around 13 to 14. It was late at night, and I was sleeping, and I remember when something opened the door to my room and walked in. It didn't make a sound, except when the door opened, and it was a man in his 60s with a cane that had a strange design on the handle. He didn't seem threatening or anything, and he didn't show any emotion. I must have fallen asleep somewhere in that time, because I had my dad come in yelling that I was going to be late for school. After school, I talked to my mum to pick me up after football, and explained it to her, describing the man and his cane. She flipped out because that night her father passed away, and I had never met this man before in my life, so there's no way for me to know what he looks like or his cane that he had for years. She doesn't even have pictures of her father in the house or anywhere that I would be able to find. This last bit, other than the main events happening, I've heard doors and cupboards open and slam shut over the years, when I've been the only one in the house since my parents usually left for work at 8 a.m. and didn't get back until at least 9 or 10. One evening about 5 years ago, I travelled to Loch Ness with a friend to see the loch and the surrounding area. We had planned on arriving by afternoon to spend the evening and then head to the hotel when it got dark. That was perfect. We got there no problems and spent the day talking and taking in the beautiful landscape. The moon began to rise, and then we decided it was time to head back, as we had spent the majority of it there. As my friend began to drive back, she went around a sharp bend, and I mean the word to it is very meaning. She narrowly avoided a man standing on the edge. She was quite understandably in shock and slammed on her brakes in sheer panic. She began to pant, verging on hyperventilating, as I tried to calm her down. She had believed she hit the man when she swerved. The man was okay, as we later learned, because he walked towards the car and apologized for standing so near the road. After, we tried to make small talk with repeat apologies. He showed me 2 pictures and asked if I knew the people, because he was trying to track them down. It was dark, so I switched on the light and quickly glanced, then I said I didn't. I showed my friend and she shook her head without properly looking, but was still in shock. The man didn't ask for the photos back, nor did that conversation go any further. He apologized again and wished us a good night. Without realizing, I joked that we would be better once we got back to the hotel. He laughed and walked off, and we drove on. When we were in the hotel room, I looked at the 2 pictures more attentively and felt sick to the pit of my stomach. One picture was of me and my friend stood at the water's edge overlooking the loch with my arm wrapped around her. The picture had been taken from behind. The second picture was of me and my friend walking together, our faces clearly seen. That picture was taken from the side, but it must have been done in a wooded area because you could see tree branches. We both sat there for about an hour with the pictures at our fingertips facing us, speechless. I tried to remember the man but couldn't remember any features because of the darkness besides a beard, glasses, and that he was soft-spoken. Later that night, I was awoken by my friend who was screaming frantically. When I ran into the room, she said that the man with the tall glasses was watching her through the window. We packed up and left, and I've never been back to Loch Ness since.